ahead and call this meeting to order. If we could have the roll call, please. Here. Here. Here.
Here. Here.
Here. Very good. You all should have received the minutes. Are there any questions or comments regarding? Okay, then I'll entertain a motion to approve. Tyler?
Second.
Oh, Jack seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Tree fund overview.
I'm just interpreting data. I think one of the reasons we're here is that there has been a county-wide outcry about clear cutting. And I think that the data show exactly that. 172,000 is not an outlier. 365,000, 352,000 in 2021 and 2022. That's a lot. That's a lot of trees that came down. That's a lot of money that came in because people chopped down trees. That's why we're here. Because the public is seeing the clear cutting and they can't stand it. And it's time to do something different. And those are the data right there that we've brought in the money from people cutting down trees. I just wanted to state that as a fact. That's all.
And just thank you to Wendy for using your microphone. I was supposed to tell everybody, remind everybody to use your microphone, and thank you for doing that. Okay, this slide just shows some recent projects. This is not a list of all projects. It's not a list of every cent that was spent in these years, but just some examples. So this year we did a tree giveaway a month or so ago, spent a little bit of money. We've done some projects where we're planting existing stormwater ponds. So these are, you know, basic ponds with grass slopes, and we're working to, sorry, my phone's going off. Working to revegetate those areas with working with our public works folks. We did a project in 2021 in Spring Hill, was a green infrastructure planting project. You know, that's a little bit of money. And I think what you'll see for the most part is these projects that we do are a little bit of money, because a project takes staff time, right? And so we do kind of have a plan, and I'll talk a little bit about that. In 2020, we did a cool project, a partnership with Bethune-Cookman University. They had a larger grant to do a treatment wetland on the Nova Canal. We provided the money to do the plantings in that project. And then a couple of others, you know, we put some native trees at the Berry Hall. We did another stormwater pond. We provided plant material for the New Smyrna Beach Disc Golf. That's actually a disc golf facility that's on county property, and it was basically an open field. And so we provided tree fund money to do plantings. And in 2019, we did a tree giveaway as well. Now, we did have a little hiatus on that because of COVID, but so just a few examples. What we would like to do in this year and in coming years, because we see more money coming in than we see going out, and the whole point of the tree fund is to get trees in the ground, is we're going to use tree fund money to hire a contract worker to actually do a plan for how to use tree fund money, right? Like, where in the county do we have areas that could use plantings? Do we want to do an urban canopy inventory? And then reach out to cities, you know, nonprofits that have publicly accessible land, and get more people using these funds. We did it's not on this slide, but a number of years ago, we did a really cool project at Stetson where they did a native planting. And, you know, again, Stetson's not publicly owned property, but it's publicly accessible. That was a really great demonstration project. So we're looking for community partners to spend some of the tree fund money. So questions?
Jack?
Yeah. How do you apply to use these funds?
We have an application process on our website. There's some information about that. It's a really simple narrative type application. You just let us know what you want to do. There's some information about the guidelines, like we'll pay for, you know, plant material only if it's native. You know, we'll pay for some of those support elements. And so that comes into our staff. We have a staff member that reviews those. We work to massage the plan if it needs to be. And then we either will directly buy the plant material, or the applicant can buy the plant material and then submit an invoice to us.
Is this
pay that?
Is this something that's commonly known? I mean, how do folks know this other than the website and an application?
It's only known through our outreach. And so the staff member that we have right now, of course, this is no one's full-time job, right? But has been making contacts with cities and with community organizations, but we feel like it needs more attention, right? The word really needs to get out better. The thing is, it's not for just random citizens or somebody with private property. So the outreach has to be pretty targeted. So we're not doing things like Facebook posts or social media blasts, because a lot of people aren't eligible. So
When you say making these outreach to a city, for instance, is it on a specific project, or you just say to the city, hey, don't forget this money is available. I mean, this is available to you.
yes, it's more like the second you said. We will reach out to who we think in the cities would be the person that would be interested, and we let them know. You know, and so we do this every year, every couple of years. Hey, don't forget, we have this tree fund that you can use, and here are some of the things you could use it for.
One last question is the money, when you get it, is it typically large developers, or does it happen on a one-off basis as well?
Both. Keith probably better answer that.
I'd say the majority of it comes from development, large development. The idea on the single family lots is to have them save trees and not pay into the fund, right? That's the whole point of the tree ordinance, is to save trees
Right.
and not to collect money. So typically it comes from larger
So
developments.
it's basically a last resort relative to the small landowners, and with developers, it's part of the plan.
Correct.
Tyler?
Microphone. So I guess the question that I would have on this is, if most of the money is coming from large development situations, and I've had projects where we tried to replant really substantially, and it was basically every square inch of land that we could put a tree on, we were putting a tree on, and we still fell short and had to pay in. They've been smaller projects. It hasn't been near the payments of what we're seeing here, but have we looked at opportunities to replant within the project footprints after they're built? I mean, maybe this is something, if you guys have a staff member coming in looking at a plan, but if we're
Yeah.
taking money from a neighborhood because they have a shortage of trees, maybe we need to put the trees back in that neighborhood.
Well, after, what you're talking about, like after the subdivision is built, putting it back. I mean, we run that public access thing and have to be on, and a lot of those public areas are stormwater retention ponds, those types of things. Typically those areas are already planted with your landscape plans, all that. So yeah, every inch that you plant in there, we calculate it and take it off the total. But
Well, and I know that there's some developments that have been built that it appears probably paid in, that they didn't really take advantage of those planting opportunities. And so, that's a review basis type of thing. And I know I've been encouraged during the reviews, so I don't want to say that you guys aren't doing your job, but I think it's other municipalities that are approving the projects. But, are those opportunities where you can go plant their ponds and things like that and reach out to the HOAs for permission? I see $1 million is stacked up over the last 10 years. So
we have a staff member that's starting Monday, part-time, and I've kind of discussed it with her. I'm trying to direct, like, you drive by these schools and you see no trees. They're just empty. And we've got 4-H programs. We've got FFA programs. We want them to reach out to the schools in Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, those types of programs, and get them involved with this. And that's why we're going to utilize some of that money to hire someone part-time to start developing these programs better. Before they're grant-based, we're waiting for the grant application to come in. And the fact is, they're just not coming in. So now we're like, we're going to go out and we're going to find them. We're going to utilize this money and make sure that we replant areas.
Wendy?
Okay, so spent a lot of time thinking and working on this. So the Soil and Water Conservation District Board made a huge effort last year to try to partner with the Volusia County School District to actually add some trees to some school properties that have no trees. Kids are out there playing on the playgrounds in the baking sun, and they need some trees. And I wish Sarah Lee were here today, because I'm sure she could, give us some insight on this, but we ran into all kinds of obstacles. Who's gonna maintain them? Who's gonna make sure they get watered? It was all the reasons they gave us all the reasons why the answer was no. They didn't want to partner. We were ready to do the work. We were talking to Christy Miller and some other people in your division about getting access to funding for these trees, but the school district just didn't want to play. And so we've also tried to talk to Tim Bailey about, we need to plant more trees along our trails, our bike trails. People want to ride their bike in the shade. They do not want to ride their bike out in the baking sun. If we're going to put in new trails, put in trees on those trails. So, I think that the people have been trying to make this happen, and it's harder than it has to be. It's harder than it ought to be. So somehow or another, we've just got to figure out a system that facilitates getting the trees in the ground and keeping them maintained. I don't know what the answer is. All I know is that we've tried. And then also, I would just say, as a recently stepped down president of the largest HOA in West Volusia, we would love to have some public dollars fund trees for our open spaces in our neighborhood. I don't think that's appropriate. I don't think it's appropriate for a developer to come in and clear cut and then expect a handout from the government to plant trees again. So I would strongly object to that. As much as an HOA board member, I would love to get a handout from the government.
can I clarify that My point was if the development paid into the tree fund, that we try to prioritize using the monies that they paid in within the development footprint and immediate boundary, because that money came from the developer over clearing the property. And so if there's an opportunity to use that money to replant the property afterwards, it's not a handout to the developer. It is giving back to the people who buy those houses what's due.
It's, if the developer overcleared the property, the developer should pay to put the trees back in.
Okay, well, I think we're fundamentally disagreeing, so we'll just agree to disagree on that. Ginger, did you have further presentation?
No, that was everything on the tree fund.
Wonderful. Well, we'll jump into our continued review, but I would like to make an announcement. This will be my last meeting with you all, so take it easy on me. I am going to step down from the ENRAC. I have submitted a letter to Ginger and to Jake Johansson is the at-large. The at-large had appointed me, not him, but to give him more time to appoint someone. I said I'd stay on for this meeting, but effective tomorrow, I will step down. I wish you all the best. I know you're going to do great things. And just know it really was a matter of functioning as V card. I just couldn't be as effective, I feel, as I could be off of this board. And what I look forward to is continued participation, bringing forward what our membership says. I can come and make a public comment to you all, or listen in to your meeting. So, but I did want to share that with you all. So, all right. Oh, Ginger, yeah.
So what that means is that we will need to vote for a new chair of the ENRAC committee. And so I don't, if we want to have some discussion about that, or if anybody has any ideas, or if you want to noodle on it and do it at the end, that's fine too, but we'll need to do that today before we leave. So.
Tyler.
I should tag on. My company has been selected tentatively for a contract with Volusia County, so I'm going to request the waiver. I most likely won't get it, so I will probably also not be here next meeting.
They're dropping like flies.
Requires a 2/3 vote of council, so chance of that is. I will have to step down.
Yeah. Do you all want to think through it and at the end designate a new chair? Would you prefer that? Or did I see your head nod? Yeah, I'm seeing some general head nods.
We are missing 3 members today. Mr. Zelensky, Mr. Fitzsimmons, and Ms. Morrissey.
Okay.
So alternatively, we can operate with the vice chair taking the chairman position in absence of a chairman, and we could vote. If you wanted to wait until more people were here, we could vote on it next time. It's not a requirement that we do it today, but that would just mean that the vice chair will step in.
Will there be new people appointed?
No, I would say that the likelihood of having someone new appointed in the next month is about
No,
zero.
I don't mean in the next month. I mean in general.
Yes, so there'll be a vacancy and the council, so in this case, it would be Mr. Johansson would be able to appoint a new member to fill, and then Tyler, who was your?
Barker.
council member? Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so at the end, I guess you guys can decide, unless you all agree that maybe Melissa takes it on until you have a fuller house. Which one? A fuller house? You would prefer a fuller house? Melissa, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Okay, there you are.
Okay.
All right, so continued review. We are in the actual ordinance, draft ordinance, we're at line 161. And that corresponds with the comments made, which this comment is from Melissa Lammers. I think we had answered this, the definition of protected versus specimen versus historic, which I believe Ginger has clarified at a previous meeting. And then, so then 161, Ginger, you want to, no one made a comment on it, but you have it added. Is there anything you want to say to this as staff who included the language?
Well, let me just ask a question too. We tabled the discussion about trees in planned rights of way last time.
Right.
And I don't know if you want to go back and address that now. I know that we do have Storm Kazimierzak from our Public Works Department who can add some to that conversation. So I don't know if you want to do that first before we keep going, or.
Oh, yeah,
would you
yeah, we'll
prefer-
do that
Okay.
first.
So let me navigate to where we were. Here we go. So we were here on line 147, where proposal was to add language that exempted trees that were required to be removed in conjunction with local, state, and federal public road projects. There was a significant amount of discussion about this section. We talked about we're probably preempted anyway from requiring tree removal for state and federal roads. The discussion primarily revolved around local roads, and it was originally the committee had said to remove the word local and then keep the rest. There was a motion and a second that was withdrawn. And we kind of left it for further discussion.
Go ahead, Tyler.
So I think one of the things that got clarified through that conversation was we're talking about chapter 72. So we're only dealing with land that is county land. So if it's in a municipality, what this exemption is not applicable. If it's state-owned land, it's not applicable. So the only projects that would be exempted would be county projects or city or state projects that are permitting improvements within the county right of way. So when we've dealt with that in the past, it's intersections, roundabout or a signal or something else. You have work that extends back along the adjacent side street. Those types of situations, I think, make sense for us to continue to exempt. The other component of conversation was that if the county were to mitigate the tree removal on their project, they would likely use the conserved land that we have in large tracts that's pollution forever, so on and so forth type of purchases. And so we would effectively be creating a paperwork exercise for it. So I think that it's a good idea to move forward, putting the exemption in without the exclusion of local.
Without the exclusion of local. I can't recall who was not in favor of keeping local. Oh, I'm sorry, Jessica. You want to make a comment? Do you recall? And I apologize, I don't recall who it was that wants to keep local in there. Oh, to take local out, take local out. Yeah. I don't remember. Okay. Well, nonetheless, Jessica, why don't you make your comment that you wanted to make? I was trying to spur discussion, but
Yeah, I think there was some discussion about if local projects, so this is about new roads or extensions, for instance. If something like, they wanted to, there was a widening at the loop, would those trees be exempt? If Williamson gets extended, which that's not a local road though, right? The Williamson extension. The question was, should all county road, if the county's building a new road or widening a road, does the committee have an opinion about whether or not the trees should be subject to the tree ordinance?
I think historic trees should still go to DRC for approval on road projects in the county.
okay.
No.
No, this exempts all trees. So do you want oversight over historic and specimen trees on road expansion projects or not?
By the county. Bill?
So this would include any road project like Graves is being widened right now for additional turn lanes. There's a bunch of trees on it. Any kind of road we want to either leave that in or take it out, right? That's the question.
Yes.
So we either make the county have to calculate trees, do tree surveys, do some kind of mitigation, just like everybody else, is the question here, right?
Correct.
And I do think Storm wants to.
Oh,
add to the
yes,
conversation
please.
if that's okay.
I'm Storm Kazimierzak, Assistant County Engineer. I just wanted to add that that's something to consider is when we are widening roads or building new roads, as a widening effort, we are working with private property owners, and if we have to take their property, we have to necessitate need for that. So working around a historic tree, as you can imagine, with a private property owner is not a good reason for a taking of their property in their eyes. So there is considerable, there's a considerable amount of cost and time associated with that. If we are going to realign a road to avoid a historic tree, there's a lot of time that goes with that, and cost as well. So trees in the right of way, as a practical matter, when it comes to historic trees that are in clear zones or are close enough to the road to cause a maintenance problem, really cause lasting effects and dollars and cents to the county. So I just wanted to bring that forward because it really is a sensitive subject with private property owners and the intricacies that go along with acquiring right of way to make a public improvement. Not that anyone wants to go down and mow down historic trees, but there comes a point where we have to say, okay, are we going to spend taxpayer money on avoiding this historic tree? Are we going to impact a property owner? Can we necessitate need? All those questions come in line.
Thank you. Melissa?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I, I, I understand this, but I think we have to come back to the philosophical point of the ordinance and what we stated at the beginning about why trees are important. And what Dr. Anderson brought up a few moments ago was it seems to me, have an underappreciation of trees generally among our public, potentially, given the issues with the school board and other opportunities that are out there. I lived in a city that had an inventory of its trees. It's called Coral Gables, Florida. It's a city within the greater Miami area. It's a phenomenal place to live. It was a planned community in the 1920s, and it fell on some hard times after World War II until the latter part of the 70s, and it's now one of the most sought after places to live in South Florida. Very, very pricey to live there, and a great part of that is the trees and the roadways through that neighborhood, as similar to the trails in Ormond Beach, another subdivision. The roads wind. Now, when we're talking major roadways, it's tough to have a winding. It's tough to go around a tree. But sometimes leaving a historic tree is an advertisement for the value of trees in general. You know, we talked in our last meeting about a sapling, my word, not the word we used, but it's the one that's available to me at the moment, smaller trees not being necessarily as immediately valuable as older trees. And so I'm not sure where I want to come down on this, because I appreciate the pragmatism, but I also think that we might sometimes make these decisions a little too easy, and that troubles me. And so I'd like to hear from a few other people, starting with the philosophical point of this ordinance, that we have deemed trees to have value to us, and how do we balance this?
I would like to point out some new language for consideration. You guys asked last time that we rewrite something you didn't particularly like this, so I have, and it kind of puts in their specimen historic trees. Just because there's a road project and there's a historic tree there, if they can't work around it, what I've written provides them an avenue to go to DRC and have some oversight over it. And DRC can then make the decision, yes, you can avoid it. No, you can't avoid it. So that's why I wrote it that way.
This is just some draft language that you asked for last time. So instead of saying all of these trees are completely exempt, potentially, road projects would be designed to preserve as many trees as possible. Historic only be impacted pursuant to county permit requirements. And then protected trees, so that would be, all protected trees, to be removed for sidewalks or trails would be subject to county permit requirements. So that's maybe something in the middle of what we talked about last time, just to throw up there for discussion.
I'm going to allow Jessica, who hasn't got to talk yet.
Just a question on the new language, which I think is in the right direction. For the trails, would that just be trails outside of conservation lands? Because the conservation land trails would be managed under the land management exemption?
Right.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, Jessica?
The statement about sidewalks and trails here wouldn't apply to like a forever project where they're putting in
Okay.
trail amenities, because that's publicly owned conservation land, which we've exempted.
It would be exempted anyways.
Right.
Okay, even though it's local, that's interesting. Tyler?
Sorry, thank you, Storm. The loop widening was used as an example of a project that we could just go in and widen the road and cut down all the trees with this exemption. I don't think that there's anybody at the county that would actually be able to move that project forward without it getting shut down by the county manager or public outcry or something else. We have two examples in the city of DeLand of historic live oak trees being preserved. One of them is now dead due to a lightning strike, but south end of town in front of Burger King, when FDOT widened the road, they had every right to cut the tree down due to public outcry and pressure politically. They caved, they saved the tree. You have the Walmart neighborhood market that a roundabout was built so that the tree could be preserved in the median of the road on 1792. We have a history as engineers of not going out of our way to destroy nature. However, when we get our hands tied through additional processes, especially when it's government sponsored projects, to go through additional red tape within that same agency, it slows things down, it costs additional money, it results in more congestion and less projects. And it doesn't necessarily accomplish the end goals. If it makes sense to cut the tree down, we're going to get approval from DRC to cut the tree down. Otherwise, the county manager, the county council wouldn't fund the project to move forward. So one big thought that I have is that historically, we really haven't, in my experience, had a problem with government agency being tone deaf to trying to save trees with their projects. What we've talked about is for-profit private entities that have been tone deaf to that because they don't have the same incentive and they're not answering to the same constituency of clients. And so I continue to believe that we haven't had a problem historically with this on our public facilities. We've never widened the loop. We haven't in the community here had a problem getting our other government agency partners to respect our wishes. So why create additional bureaucracy to accomplish something that we already have?
Wendy?
I'm conflicted on this one too. And I hear Tyler, what he's saying, and certainly that tree that we saved on 1792 in front of the neighborhood Walmart was not just about protecting that tree. It was also about traffic calming with that circle and, kind of filtering traffic, kind of into the downtown zone from outside. But I think too about other places like out on Orange Camp Road where we just did a major widening and we protected a tree west of MLK, kind of right there along the Victoria Hills Golf Club, right along fairway number 2. It's a massive tree. It was already leaning to the south away from the road. I believe that the road widening further impacted those trees' roots. When the storms came last fall, it blew that tree further over. It's now, tilting over. It smashed through the fence of the golf course, and it's blocking the sidewalk. It's the Victoria Park Community Council's responsibility to keep it trimmed. Pedestrians and bicyclists can no longer pass underneath this tree. So I guess I use that as an anecdote to say there are some cases where if a widening has encroached too close to a tree to keep it healthy, then it becomes life safety issue for people who are also trying to use the right of way. And so I think that we need language that allows, again, I'm inclined to defer to the county forester to be able to say in projects like that, it's probably time to rethink the future of this tree here. And, or here's a tree like in the case of the Walmart where with minimal added expense, perhaps minimal encroachment into private land, we could do something to celebrate this tree. So I really feel like it's case specific. And I would love to say, save all the trees, but sometimes it just doesn't make sense to. On the other hand, that Orange Camp widening also upset me because because we encroached substantially into a wetland and into the neighborhood buffers, which the county was required to protect. So that's a different topic for a different day, maybe.
Bill?
So before this exemption got thrown in as a suggestion, we don't have any regulations on road projects countywide.
Again,
So what are we doing before this proposed exemption?
Here's the language that exists. So this was an existing rights of way. Any tree except historic trees, which must be removed, were exempt. And then there was this B, planned public or private rights of way shall be designed to preserve as many trees as possible. However, historic and specimen trees located in public, private rights of way or easements may only be impacted pursuant to county requirements. That's what exists right now. The proposal was to strike this B and add the road project exemption. So if you decided to just go back to what we have now, it would be this section right here, which would say historic trees are not exempt in existing rights of way and not in planned or public rights of way.
Jessica?
And my question is for Storm, or maybe Tad who walked in. In the current process, because I'm hearing the concerns. If the county brings forward the widening of Williamson and it's approved and you have design, does that design ever have to go before DRC? No, right, I didn't think so. Thank you. So I'm with Tyler in that I don't want to add a step. If it was calling it out on a sheet that already went through a review, fine, that's not that big of a burden. But having to go through an entirely new process for something that we haven't typically done and that we spent 30 minutes last time illustrating that it is a paperwork exercise only, doesn't make sense to me.
They have to follow chapter 50, and chapter 50 requires permits for historic tree removal. So they do have to go before DRC if they remove a historic tree.
Okay. So, okay, so they already go through DRC to remove a historic tree?
No, they're supposed to, but they don't.
Got
I
it.
think is what I
Okay.
hear.
No, I'm just kidding. Oh, okay. All right, understood.
So
Bill.
back to this, the way it's written now, they're supposed to, but they don't. Why either take away any requirement and say it's totally exempt, or your suggested language, which is adding a complete, for sure, DRC review, right? In the language you have. So it seems like this seems to be pretty functional, and we're either going to give them a complete exemption or we're going to make them go through DRC. I don't understand what's wrong with the language as it is.
So I'll tell you why the original proposal. The original proposal was exactly what you said. The code says that if you remove a historic tree for a road project, you have to follow the permit requirements. The truth of the matter is that doesn't happen. So that was why the addition of the exemption, right, to match up what is actually happening to what the code says. But when we had our conversation at our last meeting, there were members who didn't think they should be exempt, so didn't agree with the addition of the exemption that staff provided. And so that's kind of where we are now.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yes. Melissa?
I don't know. I'm slow this time of day or something. So going back to what you just said, last time, because in practice, waivers or exemptions are not being sought even for historic trees as per current code. The idea was just to exempt them because that follows the actual practice. Is that correct? Okay. And I had asked the question about enforcement overall for discussion at some point, because if the logs are on the books and it's not being followed, then we either do need to get rid of it or we need to enforce it. I philosophically agree with that, certainly, but it should also reflect what we as a community want. That law should reflect what we as a community want. So again, it gets thorny because of that. If I was fine if you have to get a permit anyway to take out a historic tree and that's what's on the books, I'd be good with that and let it go. But if we're not doing that, then we're not protecting the trees that we said are worthy of protection. I find that troubling.
Jack?
Yeah, I do too. But I don't understand it so much. Why did they just ignore it? And why isn't there execution on our part to put teeth in this if in fact it's a requirement? I'm not sure I understand.
I know, I was gonna call on him too, not to put him on the spot, but
Afternoon, my name is Zach Gator, I'm county engineering and construction division. Design and construct the county road network. Down on the road, roads level, local roads actually from developers as a public sector. So, with regard to the question about historic trees or specimen trees or any trees whatsoever, no, we don't typically take those into account when we deal with it. For a large part of the fact that almost all of our road construction generally is widening existing road networks. So what we have to do if we were widening the road, if we're out there, one, pay for the cost of doing the tree survey. That comes out of taxpayer dollars. It's collected specifically for road impacts. All of that money comes from gas tax, you don't get anything. Property taxes that come along with funds, we have to find budget what we got. And as we try to be good stewards of that, which is to build roads and accommodate whether it's public who creates the taxes. And we need. So we don't survey the trees. And when we're widening, we don't have any choice of where to go. One side or the other. Depending on how the road is situated in the network and how and right away and how we're going to find out. Vast majority of our road network is not like almost none of it has existing trees that are right on top of the network. So it really isn't very, there aren't very many situations where we wouldn't even have potential for level and assessment. We do a very good job of early bridge division, goes out there and maintains our road. So we don't have that kind of situation. Everybody here is getting markings and for helping GA. Examples of the road we constructed in the last 10 to 15, 20 years to show exactly what our plan has been. You go out there, it's fine enough right away, not just for the money, so for the four lanes. So we make all of the improvements of clearing to come out of that. We started making adjustments based on the trees. It's not a simple adjustment. You find it as for the tree. It's not like you just put a little boulder on the back. You're going to go ahead and transitions on either side, which is going to take up more property. Every time you're dealing with somebody else's property, we usually like to give it up. So any more that you have to take from one, the other one you have to get down. He's going to need it. And try to get from the court and tell the court that you fit your need to go around and just free. So we need more of the property than not going to. So we have certain limitations that dictate upon all we put in place. This is not a large situation, but again, dealing with it. Any of those roads, I think it's seen it. Only you have to get permission to do it. That said, I like to leave. I like to go to roads. I prefer to do trees out there. It certainly makes for more intense driving. 1792 through the land that's it's a great job. We love that tax. We're not looking to protect you, but we do have to be good stewards of the finances we have. We have far more demands on our road network than we have money to do. So you're talking about adding $1 million to the road network to include the survey of all the trees within the right of way, something like purchase or adjusting the road line to accommodate a tree. It's really not the best solution. So council approved every one of our road projects to be done. So everything that's being done is not being done. Staff's authority is being done to the council.
thank you. Wendy, Jack, you want to
Yeah,
follow up to that?
I do. Does that mean, so your position is we don't need enforcement at all? And in fact, it shouldn't be on the books.
Okay. Wendy?
I was just going to agree with Melissa that I think enforcement is necessary. If it's on the books, it should be enforced. And I understand that what we're talking about today is possibly taking it off the books because the practice is to ignore it and not enforce it. On the other hand, I would also say that vehicular traffic is not the be all end all around here. You know, we also want to accommodate bicycles and other kinds of mobility. And facilitate that, which, as I said earlier, is really facilitated with shade. And and it's been my experience with Mr. Casebeer and other meetings that he doesn't believe that additional width of right of ways for bicycle infrastructure is in his wheelhouse. It's not his responsibility. That's trails. You've said that in many meetings with Tim Bailey, and so I would just say we want to save those trees because they provide shade for perhaps future bike lanes or separated bike trails, which the county really needs to start prioritizing. Anyway, I've gone off on a tangent, but I do think enforcement is important. And there are other places where, we're seeing the county, I understand we're using taxpayer dollars to do these projects, but if we say we have these values and we're going to impose these values on private landowners and developers, we better have the county demonstrating the same values in the projects that they do, whether that's building a beach parking lot or widening a road or anything. If we have values, then the county should follow them too.
Let's go Jessica, then John, and then maybe we make a motion and vote. Go ahead, Jessica.
Sure. Just a few things because I agree on the shade comment, but I think that, and we'll get to this point later, one of my sticking points is if the sidewalk and the tree are close enough, it's going to be in the drip line, it's going to be treated as dead anyways. We'll get there. Overall, I think that there could be a policy statement on new construction of roadways. New facilities should be designed to avoid trees as, to the extent possible. I think the expansion of existing right-of-way, it can't be done. I mean, like Tad said, you're widening. It is where it is. You're not going to put a loop in a lane unless it's a turn lane. That'd be interesting. I understand the policy perspective, but I do also understand that if I wanted to put on my attorney hat and say, we don't need to do this, it's that historic trees can always be removed if the council approves it, and the council approves every road project. So is the council implicitly approving the removal of those historic trees? Maybe. If they didn't, and you had to get a permit, are you going to say, we have many acres of conservation in the county, this is where we're crediting you against, now we have to manage a bank and hire 2 employees to keep track of that? Yes. So I think we're having a good philosophical discussion, and I think there's some policy direction that can be made out of this for new facilities, but I don't think it's possible to apply to existing facilities, and I don't think we should.
Okay, John.
And I'm going to agree with Jessica on that. And I think realistically, the new projects should probably contribute to the dang tree fund. I mean, if that's what's going to happen, we get hung up on historical trees. I mean, I love trees just as much as anybody, but they're going to die. Eventually, they're going to die. I mean, whether it's lightning, hurricanes, something act of nature is going to take a tree out, and then you replant, and it's a renewable resource. You can't save every dang tree in the world, and I get it. But if you go forward and make it somewhat punitive to where you replace what you take away, then you're balancing that act of depletion. And that's my point on that. So I think this is not bad the way it is, but other than we add some way of making up for that loss somewhere else, whether it's a conservation easement that they can apply it to or whatever. But I think there's a balance of, if you're going to take it, then you need to replace it somewhere.
Okay, Tyler, did you want to make and then we'll allow Tad to make a comment as well.
I think another project that I've seen built is the Spring to Spring Trail along Grand Avenue on the northwest side of DeLand. There was a substantial effort to preserve trees. It's not because they necessarily had to be preserved, but because it was what was in the best interest of the project and the community. I think that we could sit and we could look at projects and time and again and find that if we want effective results, then whether or not this exemption is in place, it's just going to change the cost of our projects. Like Jessica mentioned, we're going to create a ledger and we're going to take our conservation lands and we're going to carve off piece by piece, and we're not going to run out of land. So we're going to preserve no more trees, but we're going to spend more money. We're going to survey more trees. We're going to spend more on the front end design of our projects. And if there are trees that are of a community value, those are things that are identified early in the planning stages of a project. Those are things that we can look at. And frequently with projects, you either have an alignment where the road has to go, and whether the tree is valuable or not, you either have the road or the tree, or you have the community value, you know the tree is there and you design around it from day one. Those are kind of our two options in the seat that I find myself in. And so if the exemption doesn't move forward with the full intent of bringing the language of the law in line with how we're currently behaving, we're just going to have more congestion. We're going to get less road projects and we're going to spend more dollars per project. I don't see it actually changing anything about the outcome of the projects, because the project needs to move forward. The council is going to approve the removal of the tree.
Okay. Chad, did you want to make another comment?
Just a couple of quick things real quick. There's a big difference between what we do and what a developer does. The developer's doing something that is an elective. What we're doing is to address a public demand. As I mentioned earlier, a vast majority of our work is widening existing facilities. We hardly ever put new roads in. And we do put them in. We are extending Williamson, for example. But we do these things in response to what the public has approved or what the public has created. Developer is doing it to enrich himself and sees an opportunity. So we aren't the same as a developer in that regard. We are addressing a public need overall, and it's been at the request of the public and the council as approved by the road program overall. So with regard to paying to mitigate for the tree removal, then you're really just taking public funds from one type of project and giving them to another. At that point, the council can just make the elective to go ahead and move the money over. But if you look at what the county does holistically across the entire thing, with between Volusia Forever and all of our other projects, parks projects, lands that we own, there are a far much number of trees than what we remove for a road project. So the county on the whole preserves a large amount of trees across the entire county on our public lands. So we are a net positive overall. It's just my group is out there potentially taking down a few of them as a part of our projects.
Bliss?
I agree with what Tyler and what Mr. Casper just said. And I think the county does a great job with what they have and what they do. I think they are very conscientious in their approach. But talking philosophically, we go back to this philosophically. And philosophically, I've had a problem with this tree ordinance, because to me, every time we turn around, it seems that we are incentivizing somebody who has vision to clear cut land years in advance. Because if a man owns or a company owns thousands of acres in a certain area, they could have it all in a tree farm. But last month, y'all just said that if they clear cut some of their trees, because tree farms are a cash crop, if they cut it and then oops, within 3 years, they decide something to changes and they're going to sell it, well, they're penalized. Or the owner or the new buyer is penalized. So instead of 3 years, you've upped that to 5. So somebody who has vision and is working with the government and working within the guidelines that are set forth, they're just going to make their plans in advance. And that developer, or that landowner, I'll say, who has a tree farm, is now going to say, my land is not as valuable as the cattle rancher down the street. I think I'm going to make pasture. I'm going to grow hay. I'm going to raise cattle. So you've cut down all your trees. And your goal is 4 trees. So I think we need to be more conscientious about incentivizing trees and being reasonable about historic trees and expansion due to public demand. So I think it has to be a much broader, instead of just this and this piecemeal, which I know we're looking at 72 as a whole, but I came back from vacation and I was disappointed. And I feel, and then this conversation today is why I'm saying what I'm having to say about, I think we are creating our own problems and incentivizing landowners who want to grow trees, cash crop, why not grow trees? But if it's going to be to their best interest for years down the road for them to clear cut it and grow hay, they're going to clear cut it and grow hay.
Okay. Bill?
So, over the years, we have, needed more roads because we have more development and we just cry about not being able to, traffic, and their job is to put that infrastructure in place and let us get around. And if it's been working okay like it is, even though it's on the books that they're supposed to be getting historic trees reviewed, the purpose of that exemption is just to go ahead and just say, okay, just carry on like we're doing it. And the added expense is not small. Like he's saying, do a tree survey, calculate it out, figure out where you're going to do it, and whether or not they're using the funds to buy trees, and then those trees, then, the money builds up in this $1 million fund because we can't figure out where to put some trees, or whether it goes on to the ledger and we calculate the trees that are in the conservation lands. It's really not that much of a net benefit. So I suggest we go ahead and approve the exemption.
All right, I think I'll entertain a motion and we should. Bill, would you like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we accept the exemption like it's written, with including the local word.
Do we have a second?
Could we read it?
Oh, yeah, okay. Keith, read your suggested change.
Or, well, no.
As it's written, not as Keith had proposed. Okay, do I have a second? John? Okay, all those in favor say, I think this will work, say aye. Any opposed? Wendy, all right, motion carries. However many to one. All right, thank you, Tad. Thank you, Storm. Okay. So now we are going to item, yeah, line 160, go ahead. Uh, 160, we have, it was Melissa asked for clarification on definition of protected versus specimen versus historic, which is, you had actually clarified in an earlier meeting. So I don't have anything specific to 161 or 163. So if, in that case, if no one's commented on it, then can we just assume that it's approved? Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to page 6 of the ordinance, lines 177 to 182. I think this remains Melissa's note. No, this is Bill, excuse me. Excuse me, it's Bob. Land surveyors are not trained to identify tree species. I would suggest using a state certified land surveyor and have the arborist and sign off on the tree IDs. I like the staff change number trees. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did we not take a vote or say that it could also be a biologist in one of our other meetings?
I don't think we've ever done that.
No, no.
I'm sorry.
Bill, you want to make a comment?
Yeah, this is just, I don't know why you would say a landscape architect. They don't even do field work. Arborist maybe, but there's only a handful of them out there. Forester, but there are other disciplines. Right now, surveyors do it, and I don't even see that in here.
Well,
And
oh.
why not have ecologists or people who are really trained to identify trees do it?
yeah, so the reason surveyor's not here is because we get a lot of tree surveys, and surveyors don't know how to identify trees as a whole. And that's, of course, a generalization. But that's not to say there aren't other disciplines. So we could name them if you'd like.
A question to the committee. I've seen the problem with the surveyors, but I also don't know who else can go out and do them. I think even when we have arborist reports created, they're reviewing the tree survey. So.
Well, the other alternative is that biologist, ecologist, arborist goes out and identifies the trees to species, and then the surveyor comes in after and actually puts them on the plan.
Why has it been that surveyors just do it now? That's just the way it happens. Is that in a rule somewhere?
Bill, if you're done, I'm going to allow Tyler
I'm
to
done.
make a comment.
Bill, I don't know the survey rule, but that's interesting. I'll look it up. So one of my thoughts here is that on the trees that we just have a standard replacement criteria, it's not specimen. And if there's not differentiation in the rule, the miscategorization of species of oak or something else is probably not significant, but in our specimen size trees, it becomes more significant. There's quite a cost associated with this. It's also extremely difficult for us to schedule survey if we have to add a service that isn't currently in use. So I'm seeing the logistical challenges and would maybe suggest that if there's will for this to be included moving forward by the team, that we consider only looking at requiring it on trees where it would make a difference, specimen and historic.
Just kind of want to remind everybody that it's a tree survey, but it doesn't have to be done by a surveyor. They don't have to be shot. They could be GPSed. They could be, put on a plan that way. So you don't have to use an actual survey company to get the tree.
As a rebuttal
located.
point to that, what happens if we locate a specimen tree by GPS and it's 30 feet or 15 feet or whatever because of inaccuracies, and we get to construction and suddenly the tree is going to be taken out? What do we tell the developers?
Well, I'm talking about sub-meter GPS.
Let me just clarify that a little bit. So we started doing tree surveys maybe 8 years ago, and we were using the surveyors, but then we started using our sub-meter GPS, and you can have problems. And we had that happen in a couple of places where we said the tree was here, but it was really 6 feet over. And then you get into a train crash at the end when they're developing it. So we've said, if you want more specificity, you have to get a surveyor to get the exact location. So you do have double disciplines then to have to deal with. But I guess I'm just wondering, why is this language here proposed because we need more accuracy on our tree identification?
No, it's partly it's moved from other sections, right? Because the tree survey has been required in the past. So if we wanted to say land surveyor, ecologist, biologist, we can add any of the disciplines that the group thinks are appropriate to do the tree survey. It wasn't intended to be exclusive, I'll say.
Okay, Bill, are there other disciplines that we should add, or is this sufficient?
Should definitely add because sometimes we get into a compliance issue and then the environmental department says you have to have a
Okay, so what would those disciplines be?
ecologist, biologist, you've got forester. You should really allow surveyors still to do it, even though they're sometimes rough, because you can have a arborist come in and double check them.
So are you comfortable with that okay. Okay, so with the inclusion of that, can I maybe have a motion? Let's go ahead and just officialize this.
I'll place a motion to accept this language with the addition of ecologist, biologist, surveyor. Anything else?
Okay. Do I have a second?
I second it.
Jack, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Okay, on to this, okay. Sure. Okay, so Ginger, on the comments that pages 6, lines 177 to 182 are both addressed in that motion. Okay, 177, 196. So we're going down to, let's actually go to line 183 of the ordinance, where you're adding a plan demonstrating compliance, blah, 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 okay. So do you all see that on lines 183? There's some, now is this just moved around, Ginger, or is this introducing new language?
It's a little both. It's partly moved around. And this was one of those sections where we were intending to be more clear about what is required, right? So it's not anything that's new, a new requirement. It's just intended to make it so that if you're the applicant, you understand what you need to do. So it's just trying to really lay out exactly what's required. But none of these requirements are new. But I think Melissa's comment was something to the effect of, why are we requiring all this if then we're allowing people to clear cut anyway? That's.
Okay, were you right? Sure. We have massive clear cutting.
Which, I mean, what I'll say to that is, I mean, you know, when we review plans, they're required to meet all of the sections of this code unless they request a waiver from the DRC and are granted a waiver. And I think we talked quite a bit about the waiver process and good reasons why that exists. But when the staff is reviewing plans, we're making sure that they meet all of these requirements.
I think, and thank you for that. I think when I was asking that question, it was, before we even began. So there's more information, and I valued input from people around this table. Also, I think sometimes trees are preserved, and as you're driving by and you see the clear cutting, you don't know that there's a border around the property. I frankly think developers should put up signs and say that they are keeping some area in conservation, but that's just me.
Okay, so,
Yeah,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tyler.
So I kind of wanted to tag on to what Bliss said earlier. A few months ago, I made the comment that we have some really smart developers. We have, I'm not going to name names of who they are, but we have folks throughout the county that have historically cleared land 10, 20, 30 years in advance of development come forward, and Margaritaville pops up. We see these types of problems. These are our clear-cut communities. The tree code through a preservation instance does nothing to address the problem of those communities. I had previously suggested we look at a prescriptive code of, rather than saying you have to preserve these things, you have to have this much tree on the back end, whether it's these trees or otherwise, and assign different values to them, give more value to a specimen tree or a historic tree in that. Give more flexibility to the developer to incentivize good preservation rather than to discourage bad preservation when it becomes impossible, they just budget to bulldoze. And that's what's happening right now, or they find a loophole to exploit. So we have two problems where we're not really getting the developers at the table, we're viewing them as opposition. And when the opposition is better funded than we are, we have to become better funded. I mean, we're not trying to build the DEA and get in a war with a bunch of cartels and have that relationship with their developers. In my mind, why aren't we just prescribing what we want? But I don't want to beat a dead horse with that. This is a really good resummarization of the code. Reading through it, it makes a lot more sense than reading what's in place today. So kudos to you guys on the writing. That's it.
Yeah, I think that's a fundamental problem with this committee. We're trying to tweak existing language rather than really think about language that would get us what we may collectively want. I agree with you, Tyler, about that. Why don't we be prescriptive and say what we would like to see and somehow incentivize that and disincentivize clear cutting if that's not what we want. But I don't know how this committee gets there. I don't know how we do something like that, because this is really Byzantine stuff about trying to preserve trees, and really reads like, here's how you can cut them down if you want to. And then you've got people figuring out the rules around that. Is there any guidance here on how we could incentivize? I know we have our committee that's going to start talking in April about incentivizing rather than being punitive, but it is problem. Is this kind of exercise?
Okay. Well, let's address that in just a second, but Jessica, did you want to make a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I don't think that's a bad idea, looking at innovative approaches, but we keep hearing clear cutting, and I'm going to use Mento as an example because I just heard Margaritaville. Their latest plat is 40% preservation. So we have this logic of it's clear cutting. It's not. It's 60% of the site. Right. The original, correct. But I think that, so part of it is an education and public perspective, because you do go out and you see large swaths of land that are now cleared and graded, and you think that's terrible. But when you look at the development plans and you say, yes, but here's the targeted area that was preserved. And this preserved area, as we talked about, is better from an ecological function perspective than doing lot by lot and going tree by tree. And so I do think there are innovative things that we should think of and implement, but I think it's also a perception and a education that development itself is not clear cutting. What you're seeing is a portion of a very large property.
I agree with that. Just as Jessica knows, members of the environmental community have met with VCARD. Many of us attended the LID workshop in February. And again, that's why I made my statement about developers getting credit for what they're leaving in conservation. It is not visible to the public on the road at all. And that's not something for this organization or this committee to work on. But there is an issue with public perception, certainly. And we talked last time a little bit about clustering densities so that we can also have greater conservation areas. And I don't know that comes in tree preservation language or where that comes in, but that's also a public education issue.
So that subcommittee is going to address this bigger picture question, and I know it can't convene till after April, and I think that's just the constraint we have. I'll share, as VCARD, that is something I want to take on. Is I love this idea, more education. That's what we're about. So know that I'll take that thought process. What we can do as the development community to help people see that there are trees being preserved. But hopefully you guys are satisfied with that. The subcommittee, unfortunately, we have to wait a couple months. You all will have to wait a couple months. Oh, I'm sorry, Wendy, go ahead.
Sure. Well, I was just going to say, I was going to say exactly what Melissa just said about the value of, of clustering homes and saving green space. Of course, yes, and we should be educating more and more. I wonder though, and I mean, we are in this, who said Byzantine, kind of piecemeal revision of this code, and yet we aren't touching other elements of land development code and zoning code that specifies lot sizes and specifies, all of those densities and things like that's what people are also screaming about. And so at what point does the work that we're doing here then get translated? I asked this, to the staff at the end of the table, how does this get translated into some of those other elements of the comp plan and the zoning and land use codes? Because we have to. I mean, that's the thing. We don't want to see more density just because, okay, we know we want trees. Okay, we're starting from the point of trees, but if you say, oh, well, then we're going to say, oh, we're going to allow cluster development, some developers are going to come in and they're going to say, we're going to cluster the whole thing. And it's not a cluster anymore. It's a different kind of cluster. So anyway, all these things need to be happening in coordination. It's really difficult to be operating in this somewhat kind of isolated space of we're just talking about trees right now. I mean, this is what we've been saying from the beginning. If we're going to talk about low impact development is a set of principles that touches every single page of our code, every single page of it. And here we are just piecemealing this one piece of it just doesn't make sense to me, the process we're following.
Well, I brought this up, a couple meetings ago. Are we comfortable with the process we're doing? I have tried to think through how could we do this differently? And I think we're all open to another approach, whether that means, to me, we're physically only possible to address, one concept at a time. Maybe the idea is we can have multiple ordinances out, and as something we realize hits on another ordinance, we go to that ordinance. Maybe that's what we got to do. We got to juggle them all at the same time. But I just think from a practical standpoint, I can't understand how to move the process along. And so it's not a matter of not wanting to. It's just I don't know a clear path forward. And I look to you all. If you have a better way of doing this, certainly. Bill?
That is the problem, because we might deal with one part of the code or something like that, and a planner deals with another part, and the engineer deals with another part. This is not really the way to be creating good growth management rules, but it's what we were tasked to do. So we may need to get the county to put a bid out for some creative planners to come and go through the entire code and say, well, if you want a cluster, you want to do it this way, and you want to have more density, you got to allow height, and setbacks aren't applied in these locations and things like that to get it to happen. But I don't know if we're the ones to do that. We were tasked to look at these rules.
So when we talk about LID, that's something that's done in the planning stage. So that would be a bucket called new development. Then we have redevelopment and infill. And then we have private homeowners. Last month, Ginger presented what applies to single and two-family homes, owner-occupied or to be constructed, and then what applied to any kind of subdivision, and tried to fit all the rules underneath that for us to understand it. But it seems to me, I don't know, trying to think more holistically, maybe if we pulled back and said, let's talk about things that matter for new development. Let's talk about things that matter for redevelopment. For instance, I recall Jessica once, before we were on this committee, when we were in a meeting together, she talked about the need for swales, for instance, and for stormwater retrofits in existing parts of the city. That's not tree ordinance, but it's an example of dealing with existing development. And then you have the small rules for the single family homeowners. We determined that we want them to get a permit to take out a historic tree. And that's pretty much the only place we hit them. So I don't know where we get the most bang for our buck, but it seems to me that in our conversations, we've been focusing more on new development and then getting hung up in redevelopment or widening a road. And we're getting all hung up on those parts instead of moving forward with a vision of what we'd like to see and what are the laws that apply to that.
So I think what we're here for is just mostly to discuss the rule changes that have already been proposed. When I sat down and I started trying to figure out what would I suggest to put in front of the group to vote for a prescriptive, this is what we want to have rule, I realized we'd have to have a full-time planner writing that rule. And I don't think our staff that are present don't have full-time jobs, so I don't think they have time to do that. I know I have a full-time job. I haven't had time to do that. And whatever I write, I'm not going to be married to it, but everybody else is going to have their own opinions on different things. And I think it's somewhat got to have somebody that's an author that has that central hub point for us to have that bigger change. I do think we should, as a committee, come together and suggest some of those things. That's where I think the subcommittees can be valuable to provide some potential guidance to take to council to make these types of requests. But I think for the sake of what everybody's discussing, we have to start somewhere. Yes, the tree code touches everything. It's where we chose to start. Back at the beginning, I kind of felt like water might have been, after we had started talking about it, that I thought that might be a better place to start, but it didn't matter. No matter what, as we move forward, we're going to have to be willing to go back and go, you know what, now that we're talking about this and see it in this other context, the decision that was made 3 months ago, let's change it real quick. Let's bring that topic back up. And that's going to be one of the things that slows progress with the committee, but also ensures that the outcomes are compatible. To that end, I'll try to, for the rest of the meeting, at least be less creative with outside of what's on the, proposed agenda topics, because I think that that's some of where we're getting lost. But I also agree. I think that some of the issues we have are with new developments. I can't think of many of them that are county permitted projects. We're dealing with Chapter 72. So in the bigger context, if we really have a problem with new developments that are not county permitted projects, we're not even in the right chapter right now. So, not to say that we have been wasting our time on that, because I think we've had really good, valuable discourse, and I've learned a lot personally. But the other topic that I wanted to touch on is the LID conference. I talked to Dr. Pierce Jones, and he got me linked in with the Outside Collab group, and I've been talking to a couple of the folks there, and I now have, and I'm still digesting everything. It gets sent to me like every day. I have a DEP guide on soil augmentation for you clear cut, you re-augment, you can reforest, we can get a lot of our native back. And I think really those are areas that we need to focus, is rather than trying to prevent what is sometimes the only solution to development, figure out how to make it less unpalatable for us in the post condition. And those are areas that as a committee, there's small tweaks to existing rule, and we don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Ginger.
Okay, so I've been here almost 20 years and I feel that pain. Same with Keith, right? There are big things that need to be talked about, and there are the codes that we have to implement every day. And, we've had over the years multiple groups. We've had the Smart Growth Implementation Committee. There've been changes made to the comprehensive plan based on that committee. That's why we now have conservation subdivisions. So there are the big planning things, comprehensive planning things that are going on that are important and that then drive changes to the land development code. But there is also a need to deal with the minutia. And those of us that have to live in the minutia know that, these codes are due to be updated. And so we have sort of put those updates kind of on the back burner in favor of these larger sort of countywide projects. And now where we are is that we have codes that are seriously outdated that need to be updated. So, from my perspective, we need to do both things. And I would hate to wait on these kinds of small changes for the big things to happen, because I'm still waiting. So it's going to take both. And I completely understand that, whether or not we have the word surveyor or ecologist or biologist is a really small thing, and we talk a long time about it, but it does matter to us when we have to implement something. So I'm super excited that people want to be involved in the big topics. But I still need people to be involved in the little tiny stuff too. And on the big topic front, I'll just say this now. I was going to save it to the end. At our next meeting, we are going to need to talk about low impact development. So the meeting that you all went to was sort of the beginning of that grant process that we've talked about a couple of times. At our next meeting, our contractors will be here to give an update and to provide some preliminary findings from the work that they're doing. They're going to look to you all to engage in that conversation, provide suggestions. So that will be April 5th, because by the next meeting in May, they're going to need to have some feedback to finalize their document. That will then be the document that will, shop around to the public and to the county council and those sorts of things. So, we may or may not get through all the Chapter 72 tree changes today, but regardless, next meeting is going to be all about low impact development. So that's some of that more broad things. So I don't want everybody to think that, oh my gosh, we're just going to be talking about one word here or there for every month forever and ever. Next month we'll switch gears just a little bit, so.
Very cool. 2:26, I wonder if now, let's just take a quick break and then we'll reconvene and get back into the minutia. So let's go ahead and do that. 5 minutes, 8 minutes, 8 minutes.
Exciting thing.
One more. You notice I haven't bothered you with my questions since interactive. I'm all. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, a good group. I feel like it's gonna have impact. On a whole.
Oh, yeah. I have one person.
Yes.
I'm not included, plus I'm very good. You know, I'm just hoping that I can find, I'm not very good at years. Does it have to be? President or does it have to be somebody that's
Yeah, the boundary.
If we leave a motion on the. There's other things, there's going to be people saying. Yes. All these dollars.
It says it already. I was supposed to keep roll call for me, but I don't. Okay.
I don't like the idea. It's not better after the next hour and a half anyway. I'm trying to schedule in my geotech and my surveys. Survey, I guess up the geotech stakes or lead stakes for the geotech to go through the boring stakes so they get those. Being able to urge all business else to go out with the surveyor. Who's taking notes back there?
Me, Margaret.
Keep it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, if you ever try to sell around the property, and figure out. There are 3 years ago, it's impossible. Absolutely impossible. I can. And there's not another one around it. These 3 trees here, these trees here. It'll take me half an hour. There's no good.
See a change in how.
Arborist is able to identify a tree and tell you about itself and what you can and can't do. They don't have any survey measuring information as part of that. I'm an actual arborist. Am I wrong? Was my description inaccurate? Yes, slightly. Not far off, but I mean, in terms of surveying, you're using GPS, so they have a road that's sticking 25 to 50 feet in the air to get through the campus. They can pick up their GPS signal and run the signal next to the tree. They measure the tree, they put the information in the data collector, they go to the next one. So for us to do this, an arborist has to go paint the information on the tree before the surveyor goes out. So I have to make sure that I schedule the arborist, that I know what they're going, that before I have the surveyor out there, I have like a week or 2 buffer, so that if something happens and they get delayed, I don't have a problem. I'm responsible for all of that. I don't get paid for that, but I'm responsible for all of that. So that's why I voted against it. It's just because that is suck. I knew it's gonna pass.
7th inning stretch. How about those newbies?
Right. Probably better.
So here, you just can't fight now one at a time. One of the things that I do.
Okay, I see everyone's back in the room. Why don't we wind up our conversation? This is my go-to line. Always hate to break up good conversation, but let's get back. Boop, boop, boop. Order, order. Haven't got to say that yet. If we can go ahead and resume. All right. So,
So I think we're on at the bottom of the ENRAC comments, page 6, lines 196 through 208. Bob had some comments about one size fits all.
yes, and to me, and he uses, we're being punitive. I think this goes back to what we're going to kick to the subcommittee to address, right?
I think they're
How can you address this from a big picture standpoint rather than get into the nitty gritty? So I put a note here that we can,
move past that.
yeah, because we'll just end up,
And that's another part of that section where we just tried to pull together all of here are the requirements for each different type
Mhm.
of development. So
okay.
it's not really new language so much. Okay,
Okay.
so
So now line 210, you have through 222, there's a lot of new language, struck through language. Is that just stuff being moved around? And I see like the department division name is being updated, which is fine. 210, that item. And no one had a comment
I
on
don't
that.
think so.
No one had a comment on that from our comment pages.
No. So the next comment I think was on line 231.
Yes, this was Bill's comment. This one already says this section, okay, so you're saying a person should be able to do statistical tree survey even for both protected and specimen. This section already says the site should be uniform, so you would collect a representation of the specimen trees also?
Just a technical approach, when you have a pretty representative cover type of trees, you should be able to do, if you're going to do a statistical for the protected trees, which are 6 inches up to specimen, you could go ahead and just do that same statistical for the specimens also. And you would still do a whole historic tree survey, but you would identify those specimens and do your calculations based on the statistics.
So you want removed from this additional language specimen trees? You want
Well, let me just interrupt just for a second.
Mhm.
So you have to save the specific specimen trees, like that tree, not one of, you know what I mean? So you have to actually know where each specimen tree is because you have to save a certain percentage of them. So you really need to know where they are on the site.
Except that the way that you protect specimens is you have depending on how many you have per acre, you have to then preserve, 3 per acre or 2 per acre. So you don't necessarily have to preserve those specific specimens. You can just say, I'm preserving that many acres, specimens per acre. If you allowed to do it in the statisticals.
Oh, you're saying what you just said is not permitted now. You're suggesting it as a permitted way to save specimen trees?
I guess, yeah, because if she says you have to preserve specific specimens.
Mhm.
But right now, you calculate how many you have to preserve per acre based on how many you have. And if you have a ton of them, then you have to preserve a small amount. And then you would just preserve those specimens that you have to preserve. Doesn't matter where they are.
Well, but you have to know exactly where they are to know if you've saved them. Yeah, like you can't say I've saved 8 if you don't know where those 8 are.
Good point.
I don't know. I don't see how it works, but
The-
maybe I'm
Okay,
missing something.
Well,
I think to support Bill's point, not necessarily that I fully am in agreement with the suggestion, but say you have 30% of a site as conservation, do we need to tree survey the entire section that's getting conserved? If you surveyed a quarter of it and it had 10 specimen trees in it, would you assume that there's 30 in the other part that you were also saving, or do you need to survey all of the property? I think the goal is to get the cost of the tree survey down where, we can, where we have consistent forests. But I understand your point. I understand his point.
Bill, go ahead.
So like right now, we're doing a 1,200 acre tree survey and we're doing statisticals on for just the protected. And this is New Smyrna, and they said, no, you've got to locate every single specimen. So they are, living up to chapter 50. But they're in the preserves pretty much. And so we have to, survey the entire preserved area and development area because we need to prove where all those specimens are. Whereas if we just did a statistical, we already have preserved areas. And if the habitat is similar, they should be in there.
Is it typical that habitats is that what the science says? That's why you do statisticals, because typically the habitats are similar just trying to understand the science. Jessica?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it depends on the habitat type that you're looking at, but I think what I've seen is, take 2 discrete 100 by 100 samples and use that to show that within a larger tract, you're going to exceed the requirement. If it's close, you have to re-review, obviously, but you take 2 conservative samples of that habitat and then use that to extrapolate.
Okay, so I guess what Bill is suggesting is allow for statistical analysis and not necessarily pinpoint the exact specimen tree if it is uniform. Okay, is that a motion you're making? Or do you just, you'll let it go?
I'll make that motion. That
Okay.
it reads that we strike which do not contain specimen.
Hold on.
Sorry.
Oh, okay. Jessica, in the meantime?
Just a question. I think that works for specimen tree, but I don't know if we do that for historic.
Yeah, I think
Right,
he's only
right.
referring to specimen in this regard. Okay, so Bill is suggesting to remove the word specimen. Is there a second to that? Okay, I am going to do a roll call on this one. Any questions or discussion?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand. And, it's only because I'm ignorant to this sort of survey. And,
Sure.
and so I understand statistically and all that, but I can't make a good judgment on
Well,
the total.
I think for us lay people, what the principle here, and like Tyler said, is trying to reduce the cost of the survey.
Understood.
And so do we feel we should allow them to not have to be so precise in identifying specimen trees and allow them to just kind of extrapolate from their statistical analysis?
Yeah, I understand in general. I guess I'd like to hear from you guys, the county, and tell us, why we shouldn't.
Yes.
And that maybe, maybe it's a great thing. I'm not sure, but
That's a
I
great
don't,
idea.
I don't want to loosen things up some fashion with a statistical analysis.
As an example, I would say if you have a site that's, let's just keep numbers simple. If you have a site that's an acre and you've got, less than 3 specimens per acre, you've got to save 80% of them. So how can you get to the exact number of that 80% if it's a statistical analysis? You won't have an exact number. That's why they have to identify each individual one now so we can get to that exact number, where they're at on the site, which ones are being preserved, which ones are being removed, so we can meet that section, the specimen tree section of the tree code.
Yeah, that case doesn't sound like statistical analysis is accurate enough.
Correct. We wouldn't know if we were meeting those requirements of 80%, 65%, 50% of specimens being saved without a number, without the exact number.
That makes sense.
How does
Wendy?
that, yeah,
Oh, go ahead.
how's that
Jay.
work?
So we would not propose to do a statistical on a 1 acre site. We would just do every tree out there. It's when you get these really big sites, 4 or 5, 600 acres. And then, so they allow statisticals. So we'll put plots in places so we represent all the habitat types. And we'll count all the protected and all the specimens inside that, and you extrapolate that across the whole site. You still have to walk the entire site to look for historic species or historic trees. Now you have to also, as you're walking through the swamp or whatever it is, every tree that's greater than either 12 inches or 18 inches, you're measuring, locating, flagging, and those are your specimens. So if you have a lot of specimens and you have to preserve 20% of them, you know exactly where they are. But statistically, if you did it that way, you would just say they're in there.
Okay, I get it, but in your proposal, you didn't say only in big projects
That's
or,
true.
and so this would apply to 1 acre projects or any other project. So that clarification would have to be there before I can support it.
Wendy?
Well, we are talking about a section that is in a heading non-residential standalone tree permit, section 4, right? So we're not talking about 1 or 2 acre individual residential sites, right? I mean, up there, number 4, line 210. We're talking about the big projects, right? Is that right, Ginger?
Well, yeah, we have lots of projects that are in, a couple of acres to 20 acres to 50 acres.
Okay.
We have tons of those.
Yeah, the question would be first.
Okay. Well, so I'm just saying, in light of like, okay, we don't want to make things, overly burdensome for individual homeowners, individual property owners, but I'm not interested in changing the code to just make it less expensive for developers to, not take care of the trees. I mean, I'm not interested in protecting their bottom line. That's not what we're here to do.
Understood. Jessica?
Yeah, my comment was related to acreage and again, the, on sites over 50 acres, maybe it makes sense on a manpower timing. But I think that the language, the way that it's currently up there, striking the which do not contain specimen or historics, I think is okay. I think what Bill was saying was put that back, but I don't think that that makes sense from a practice. I think it would have to say only historic trees would be individually identified on statistical surveys.
Right. So where there's the additional language in 231, instead of it saying historic or other specimen trees must be individually identified, he's suggesting only historic must be individually identified. Right. Tyler? For the,
Survey some percentage.
yeah.
Lots.
Sure. Well,
that almost all of our developments that happen, they're 50 acres and above, whether it meets the LID definition or not, happen in a clustered fashion. There's a section of land that's set aside for pure conservation, and there's a section of land that's very definitely graded. That's really where we're talking about making this applicable, which is where the land size comes in. And when you have those huge tracts of conservation, surveying every tree in it isn't necessarily adding value to the public, just like surveying every tree you're cutting down isn't necessarily adding value. The goal is that we have a system that ensures that you're setting aside enough land statistically to achieve the value of tree retention that we're trying to achieve.
That's me.
So, reduction of the bottom line is to reduce the cost of the houses. It's not making the developers more money. It's not making it easier for them to cut more trees down. It's just to make the process easier for us to get through what we're accomplishing.
Okay,
I just wanted to answer Wendy's
Yes.
question. No, so section D and then E that we're talking about is for everything. The 4 is under parent C, right? So we have B, C, and then C has 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are the different types of development. And then we go to D and E. So that applies to all tree permits, not just the non-residential standalones. Yeah, it took me a minute to go back. I mean, the other thing that we could do, and you know, this is what we do on projects now is, you know, there are cases where something is unique and there may be a unique solution. In general, like I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around how we will verify compliance with the specimen tree requirements if we don't know where the specimen trees are on the site. But there may be big tracts where it's uniform enough that you could feel pretty confident that a statistical would work. I would say that is the unusual case, not the common case. So, you know, we could put something in there, you know, at the discretion of the forester, at the discretion of the DRC or something like that. Now, typically you're not at the DRC, but before you do your survey, right, your survey comes very early in the process.
Ginger, right now, people do have to identify individually specimen trees, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And Bill, you know, if I may voice my opinion, you know, I'm with Ginger on, you know, how can you be most accurate? I don't see the need to make a change here if this is how it's always been done for the sake of, you know, I mean, I don't wish ill will on the person doing it, but this is how it's done. This is the cost of doing business. And I just don't see the need to change. But Bill, if you had another comment or.
Yeah, I could back down off of that. But then we would leave this strikeout, which do not contain specimen or historic, right? So that allows you then to do a statistical for the protected trees. That's fine.
Is that agreeable to the?
Sure.
So that's okay? I mean, you understand what he's suggesting there? Okay. He wants,
Leave what's written?
So right now it says,
Okay.
right now it says which do not contain specimens.
Right.
So if there are specimens in there, technically, we're not supposed to allow them to do a statistical.
Yeah, we're trying to make it
We're trying
a little
make
bit
it
easier. Yeah.
For them, you know, to follow what the practices are.
Mhm. So we are leaving the strike through, which is what they recommend. So I think we're all in agreement.
But we probably need procedurally to, we have a motion and a second,
Yeah.
so we need to do something with it.
Oh, yeah, we gotta,
Yeah, I can
Take action,
withdraw
yeah.
that and put on that we approve it the way it's written.
And the second has to agree with the change.
with the change. Who's seconded? You're good with that? Okay. Oh, point of order, Jessica.
As it's written, or we keep the strike through and we remove or other specimen trees from the additional text.
Will you
The
keep the strike through, which would remove?
It does not currently remove.
No,
The
okay.
second sentence.
Oh, I'm
So-
sorry, the second sentence. Oh, yeah, keep the strike through and keep the new addition underlined, the underlined new addition. Yes,
I don't
keep
think
it.
that's what the intent. With or
It is.
other specimens?
Yeah, he said he,
Yes.
So
we're
it will
back to
read, can I just be really clear? So it will read predominantly of trees uniform in age, species, and distribution, period. Historic or other specimen trees must be individually identified.
So we're back to
Correct.
tagging every
Okay.
specimen.
yes,
We are.
Well,
yes,
we,
that's, okay, yes, Tyler.
So I think the question of how do we know if we're saving every specimen, tree accuracy, things of that nature, the suggestion that Bill was making was not accomplishing a perfect statistical accuracy. It's why I had talked about we're probably going to have a 5% error. But when you're dealing with 500 acres are being cleared and 200 acres are being preserved, and you survey 10% of those and you apply, we had 20 trees within the 10% we surveyed. So we have 200 trees that are in, excuse me, it's being saved. And we have, this many trees within the area that's being cleared. It's an approximation. And so it's a question of how, if I'm dealing with a site plan and I need to know where the specimen tree is so I can locate the building and save it within my 3 acres, I have to know where the tree is exactly. But if we're dealing with hundreds of acres of preservation, I don't care where the tree is on the acre. I'm saving the whole acre. And so statistically, it's going to be pretty close. I think that's where I agree with Bill's suggestion. I mean, if the group doesn't want to move forward with it, I'm not going to die on the sword. But I don't think that it was a bad suggestion. And I don't think that it would have the negative consequences that are being pictured. It would
If,
just be cheaper.
if a site did come in and say, we're going to do a conservation subdivision or a cluster subdivision and preserve so much space, would you require them to survey that space?
Yeah.
well, let me say this. If there was a site that came in and it was 500 acres and it was uniform, which that's not going to happen really. If you have 500 acres, you're going to have some wetlands and you're going to have some uplands and whatever. But I can see where there may be a case where it is not necessary to survey the entire thing because I'm saving 60% of it, right? And that's where you would come and say, hey, is there a unique way we can do this? And we can say, yeah, let's do it that way. We do that all the time.
Okay, so already the way the ordinance is written, somebody could come in and ask for some sort of waiver to this. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Keith, were you gonna?
Yeah, so we typically deal with properties all the time that they're not developing sections of it, right? Or this area is going to be in wetlands or whatever. We're typically only looking at the project area. If they can meet all the requirements in the project area, that's what we look at.
Okay. Well, great. So we had the motion withdrawn and then came back to keep it as have Ginger read, and you were agreeable. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. On to the next. Yeah. Did you? Oh, I was like, Tyler. Okay. All right. So tree permit issuance. 235. So no one put a comment to 235 up to 247. So is any of that one tree permit issuance 1, 2, or G? Is that new language you're proposing, or is this moved around? Okay, so we're fine there. Yes, Tyler? I'll be honest, I didn't have us vote on one thing. We just all were like, yep.
All
And
of it's resummarization. I was earlier going to make a motion to as proposed, and I think we just moved on from it. Nobody made a motion.
okay, for 2B.
Or is it?
Or not to be.
Yeah, for 2B and for 3A and B. It's all the things we're talking about.
Ew.
I'm not trying to take that. I just skipped it.
Oh, Lord. Yeah, that
Motion to approve as written, section 2B and 3ABC.
I think in general, unless we say otherwise, we're saying we do adopt status fair.
yeah, that's how I was operating. If you're comfortable with that, yeah. To do all the changes. Are you comfortable with that? Okay.
We've been voting on it.
We had, I did skip over. Yeah, I have a couple times, Tyler, when I saw there was no comments, no one was raising their card, I did just skip ahead, but yes.
So, had made a motion, right? Okay. Oh, is he gonna withdraw that?
Okay, why don't we go ahead and vote? If the motion's on the floor to accept 2B, C, D. Is there, oh, I didn't ask for, is there a second?
Yes.
Melissa, all those in favor say aye.
Uh,
Aye. Any opposed? None. Motion carries. Melissa?
Sorry. I moved that if there are no comments on one of that we just accept that and not take an individual vote on it. Just if nobody made any comments, just move on.
I second it.
Say aye.
Aye.
Oh, the lawyer's making a face. Or this one here. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Okay, let's move on. Where were we? Tree permit issuance. Nobody commented on this. The next comment's not till 247, termination of permit. And this was Bill again. Tree permits should last more than 1 year because a lot of things can slow down a bit. Okay, so you want to be able to renew a tree survey with a growth coefficient maybe, so that if a permit expires and needs to be renewed, it can be done without redoing the tree survey. Go ahead, Bill.
Somehow we need to have a way, because Ginger's right. Tree surveys get done right at the beginning. And then a lot of things can happen. In fact, it could take a year to get through the process. And then oftentimes we're like, or it sits on a shelf for a year or two. And then it's like, you got to go do the whole thing over again. And we have suggested that maybe you, instead of doing the whole tree survey over again, you just say, okay, a tree grows in general, whatever, per year. Let's just update it that way. And
Keith,
I don't know if there can
yeah,
be some
Keith.
kind of flexibility like that.
Yeah, so this is just, putting into words what we actually do. So a lot of tree permits, when and they're about to expire, people just send an email and say, hey, we need 6 more months or a year more to work on this project. We've never turned one down. Like, and typically if there's a project and it's expired in a year, and let's say you've got to come back in and renew it, we take the same survey. We usually do not require a new survey unless it's more than 5 years old.
Okay. Yeah, and Bill, it does say here, unless time extensions are granted by so there is that ability, which it sounds like that's how it's been moving along already. So are you comfortable with that?
Yes.
All right. Moving on from that comment to 251. Hasn't the forester already done site visits and issued the permit on 251? Okay, sure. Allowing the county forester sufficient notice to perform necessary site inspections. So you're suggesting the forester does not need to. Go ahead, Ginger.
There is an inspection typically after the permit is issued, but before construction can commence, that looks at the tree barricades around trees that are intended to be preserved and looks for, erosion control and that kind of thing. So that's really what that is.
Okay, very good. 257. Let's see, 257, 15%. Should this be larger, graduated protection in Norma and Eco? And several of you, I won't read them, but you guys had comments. Jack, Jessica, Bill, and Alex. So 50%. So I think this is where we gotta come to some finding on what this percentage should be. So 15% of the square footage of any development shall be designated for the protection of existing protected trees within tree preservation areas. Yeah, 15% of the square footage of any development shall be designated for the protection of. What does that mean? Existing protected trees?
15% of it has to be set aside for the protected trees. The reason we put in the underlying part, existing protected trees, is if you have a site that's a pasture, then you're saving 15%, you don't have existing trees, right? So, or you have a site that's partially cleared and partially treated, but the tree preservation needs to be the tree part of it, not the cleared part of it. So that is, underlying part is just clarification language, so 15% tree preservation area is what's existing.
I think what's confusing about that, because I read that multiple times. I'm like, I took my dummy pill today. Maybe that word of existing protected trees, because what you're really saying existing trees, right? In the,
Well, yes.
Well,
Right. So
okay.
protected trees means trees that are 6 inches in DBH or
okay,
larger.
back for
So
the very
that's-
beginning under
Yes,
definitions.
yes, that's
Sorry.
why
Okay.
it has to say it that way.
Thank you.
Bill? Okay, Wendy?
So not to get out of order, but I would like to talk about this in light of Part B following, which is at the bottom of Part B, it says that this area, the 15% may include the landscape buffer, the required landscape buffer. And I would like to challenge that part because, there are some of these developments that are getting away with, a 25-foot buffer, which, in many cases is hardly protecting the existing trees. You're doing such a thin little line. First of all, you can see through it from the road. It's not truly a buffer. And second of all, a lot of those trees are so exposed now, having lost a lot of their, kind of companion vegetation around it, that, those trees are going to fall down anyway. And so to me, it doesn't really seem like the landscape buffer is truly a tree preservation area. I would just suggest, if we're looking for stronger language here, that we remove that line from Part B. I could live with 15% if it doesn't include the landscape buffer, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Okay, Jessica?
Wasn't on. I'm gonna almost say the opposite, but not completely. And one, I think that landscape buffers aren't intended to always be opaque, so I think that's okay. But I would say that maybe if we were not to include the landscape buffer, but you can include common open space, that is a trade-off. Because I don't know why, and I've had this discussion with everyone at county planning, why preservation areas can't be used for common open space when we want to encourage passive recreation in our developments.
Oh, I can probably answer that because the common open space has, requirements. You have to have trails, you have to have amendments, you have to have things that impact trees and tree roots. So they're not compatible. And some landscape buffers are 15 feet. So some are even smaller than the 25 feet you're talking about.
Okay, so you're saying those common open spaces sometimes hurt trees?
Yes. So,
Okay.
we've
So it doesn't
seen,
meet the end goal of preserving. Okay, Jessica, we're gonna have follow on, or I'll move to Tyler if
I
not.
mean, I just think it's a broad statement. Like, if you have common open space within a beauty, the county requirement's 20%, right? So if you have 20% of your site in common open space, some of those areas have to be amenitized, but you can't use the conservation areas to meet it, even if the trail is only through a portion of it. So there's just I feel like a disconnect between, if you had a passive walking trail that wasn't paved, why wouldn't that be counted?
I've had this argument with them as well. They don't typically want unpaved trails. They have to meet ADA requirements. So, mulching trails, trails, that they want hard structure for people to walk on. So, yes.
Okay. Jessica's pondering that. I'm gonna move to Tyler.
Trees, frequently tree conservation areas, billboard, lots of other things, protect green zones, things of that nature. There are ways for us to do this. We have restriction in place ties our hands. So I think Jessica had a really good point there. What I was going to point out for Wendy is, if you read the last line of bullet C, that they're suggesting adding a 30-foot minimum with restriction. This is something City of the Land has added. It sure is frustrating when I have a 25-foot landscape buffer that somebody planned to be in order to clean out with street preservation, and now we have to make it 30. And we often have to rework the whole plan, but that's something that's been effective. The minimum width, that's a starting point for conversation, I'm sure. I wanted to kind of put out there food for thought for everybody. At the last meeting, Bob was talking about his project. It's on Grand Avenue, it's 1 acre lots. He has a minimum 15% tree preservation area. He has 1 acre lots. There's going to be more trees within those lots. We don't really need, in my opinion, we don't need more than 15% conservation on that side of the property. The Reserve in Victoria project is a 200-acre subdivision on Martin Luther King that my company, this engineer record on. We have, I believe, 28% conservation, and I don't want to quote that specifically, but between 25 and 30% conservation on that property. We had to replant parts of that area with a reforestation plan in order to meet our minimum tree coverage requirements. Go back to the city of the land use. So with that, we cleared cut 70% of the site and for the role of the reserve almost 30%. The code didn't require 30% preservation, it required 15% preservation. It was making the economics work. It was making the overall density requirements from the future land use and other comp plan elements work. It was code coming together to create the type of thing that we're trying to create here. So if we look at increasing that 15% as a one size fits all, we're not going to have 1 acre subdivisions anymore, or they're going to become much more exclusive. And so I think to get that mixture of subdivisions, we leave a little bit more open, and I think 15% encourages what we really good balance, and we see the higher conservation and the higher density developments.
Okay, and I didn't hear anyone against the 15%, just there was a caveat to it. So, okay, Jessica?
Yeah, I'm trying to piece these together because I hear concerns and I agree with part of them, but I don't want to find ourselves in a situation where I think right now we would, where if we don't count the landscape buffer, which is ironically usually around 15% of a site when you go around, and then you have 15% tree preservation that can't be counted towards open space, and then you have a 20% open space requirement, you are at over 50% of your project already gone.
The stormwater should be at least 15,
Right.
25%.
So, right, there has to be in my mind, the open space requirement is the way, and I know it's a planning thing and an environmental thing to where if we want to preserve natural areas within our developments, we can do that and create passive recreation opportunities that meets the intent of having open space without taking away half of a property's usable acreage.
I was going to suggest that, we can talk to the planning folks about, maybe there's sort of what Tyler said is, if part of it is passive recreation, and keep in mind, this conversation is really only about subdivisions, but this rule applies to Walmarts and, Dollar Generals and everything, right? But so in subdivisions, there's open space requirements. Maybe there is a way that there's sort of some parts of the open space that are passive, and the developer designs those amenities up front. We know what's going to be there. That could work for tree preservation. Now, if you're using your tree preservation as natural vegetation retention, right, where you're counting all of the little trees, that's a little bit harder because that means you can't cut down any of the stuff even to put in a trail. So, but I feel like, that makes sense that there are some areas, and we want people to recreate in forested areas, right? So, but that's not something that, Keith and I can say would work. We can get the planning folks engaged and see, see about that. I was going to make one other point, but I might have forgotten it now. Okay.
So yeah, so the NVRAs, that's typically what you see in subdivisions. There's not a lot of benefit to just having a tree preservation area. People want to double dip with that. They want the double designation so they can get credit for all those trees. Likewise, they get credit for all the trees in the landscape buffer that they plant. So you don't see a lot of what you're talking about because they're trying to make up the replacement issues.
Okay, sorry, I remember what I was gonna say. So the 15% is what's required now. There was talk at the county council and there has been talk over the years, partly with the Smart Growth Implementation Committee, is, should that be a graduated requirement as you go into these more, what's the right word? Sensitive areas like the natural resource management area or the environmental court overlay. So that's really a question that I know the council wants to hear from this committee on. Should there be levels of protection depending on where you are in the county? And I would say, think wildlife corridor as well, because I think when we talk about the natural resource management area, there is some desire, at least at the staff level, to look at that area and potentially expand it to include the wildlife corridor where it doesn't, where in many cases those two areas overlap, but they don't marry up exactly. There are areas of wildlife corridor that are not in our natural resource management area. So, so that's sort of the bigger picture idea of, in our urban areas, 15%, is that the right number? And if so, great. But in these other areas, is it a different number?
Are there ordinance language already that applies to Norman Eco? Isn't there already higher standards? I thought that's the whole point of those overlays.
In the wetland code, there are higher standards.
For Norman Eco, but not
in the tree code.
Not all, okay. And that was Jack's comment, Jack, I don't know if you remember putting this, that there should
I
be
do.
higher standards on Norma and Eco. Bill?
Okay, so first of all, but don't let me forget to ask about the higher standards for Norma and Eco. But I don't think we should increase it to above 15% for normal zoning and areas. And I do think we should figure out a way to allow it to be used for open space, because it just, as an ecologist that really does like trees, and I go out in nature all the time, can't imagine that with that site plan you showed where they just can't go in that preserve area. They can't do anything with it. It has to just be woods that never even get managed. That's the way the water management district actually thinks about it sometimes. Once you place it under conservation, you can't put trails, you can't even put a mulch path in there without getting it permitted and mitigate for those impacts. So I would hope we can find a way to double dip, and then also using the tree buffers, the buffers, we should be allowed to do that because of the additive nature of that.
The tree buffer, the landscape buffer?
Landscape
Okay.
buffer. Sorry, thank you.
Okay,
And then, but let me,
yes.
on a NERMA or ECO, would you have a subdivision? You could.
But you get an incentive if you cluster. You get have the incentive to not have that sprawl of the 1 acre lots through, all bisected the septic system. And stuff like that.
Okay, so then you're not gonna have the normal layout like we're all thinking about that needs this minimum 15% tree preservation area. You're not gonna have 60-foot lots or whatever. You're gonna have 1 acre lots. And so even increasing it in NERMA, to me, doesn't seem valuable, because you're going to probably, if you have 1 acre lots, a lot of those people are going to be keeping their 15% anyways. And 15% on a 1 acre lot's a lot of land.
Oh, do you got your, okay, let me go to Wendy and then Wendy.
I can definitely agree with Jessica about, and Bill, about, trying to double dip on the open space, depending on what the open space is. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what all counts in the open space requirement, but, certainly if we're just talking about passive trails, I mean, we should certainly make, whether it's mulched or boardwalk or whatever, those kinds of tree preservation areas accessible to those homeowners. It is an amenity. It is. I would kind of hold firm that we're not going to count. I don't care if it's 15, 25 or 30-foot buffers. I still don't think we should be counting the buffers, because in many cases the buffers are not accessible to anybody else except the, maybe the home that has it at its rear. But what was my other point? I had another point. I've totally lost my other point. No, it wasn't even about Norma and Eco. I don't know. Let me come back to me. I'm not going to think. I'm going to think about it for a second. I totally lost my train of thought.
Okay, on Bob's talking about open space, double dipping, all of that, I'm on board too. I just wonder if open space is also a shaved retention pond area currently. That, again, the devil's in the details. That would be one question I'd have about that. And then I had another.
You're talking about the retention areas?
Yeah.
They don't typically allow the retention to be counted, but I have seen them allow trails around them,
Mm-hmm.
and they do count that.
And would that be a vegetated trails somewhat, or?
Well, typically it's been cleared and burned,
Mhm.
and so when you get close to those retention areas, you know they've got outfalls, they've got all these structures. It's usually cleared. 100% cleared.
I think the intent, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think the intent and the compromise we're trying to strike, the intent is to keep as much biological integrity or ecological integrity as possible without overburdening the subdivision, and to allow for recreation in nature, in which case a trail through an area would be that happy medium. Would a retention area that's been completely cleared and burned, would that be that happy medium? That would be my question on.
We wouldn't count that as tree preservation because there
Okay,
wouldn't be any trees.
because there'd be no trees. Then in going on to Norman Eco, which is why I had my little sign thing up. So Tyler's talked a lot about incentivizing what we want rather than punishing or trying to regulate what we don't want. And currently in the environmental core overlay, we do allow for subdivisions, but we allow that incentive to cluster them. To my mind, it's not that great to have all these little 1 acre lots, each with its own private road, each with its septic system. That to me is more sprawl and more environmental, and correct me if I'm wrong. This is just the way I'm looking at it from what I know. So to me, that seems like it's more environmentally devastating in this land that we've designated as very important. Much of it is the wildlife corridor, which, as you all know, the Florida State Legislature has finally recognized formally and has put money behind it. Now, that doesn't mean no development, but to my mind, we should be trying to conserve as much as possible when we develop in those areas. And we're doing that through an incentive. The question asked in this paperwork was, should we increase our tree preservation in that area? And to me, probably yes, but how we do it really matters. Not just increasing it for increasing it, it's how does this get done?
I was going to suggest that we, after the comments are made, we're going to vote on this language before us, and then I think we can take on Norma and Eco if there needs to be graduated standards for that. Wendy?
Okay, I remembered my thought. So, and Melissa really was just kind of hinting at this as well. So this is really a question for staff, which is, a lot of this language is it's explicit to an individual project. Here's a landowner, here's a developer, they're going to do this thing on this acreage, 50 acres, 500 acres, whatever it is. But that doesn't exist. It's going to be next to other areas. And so is it possible, this is a question, over to staff, is it possible if they already know that there are other projects coming through the pipeline that are adjacent to those projects, before them in the application on hand, that they could coordinate between those two landowners or developers and say, hey, look, you guys are going to do your 15% on the north end of your property. We'd like for the other development north of that to do their preservation on the south end of the property. So now you get a bigger habitat preserve that, that benefits the benefits more. I mean, and then you could even, allow the residents to, have walking trails throughout that larger area. So I think of the examples in Victoria Park, and then the relationship between Victoria Park and the reserve at Victoria to the north of it, which is not part of Victoria Park, by the way. There's a ginormous wetland. That's technical term, ginormous. There's a very large wetland, and it is divided up into at least 4 jurisdictions. The Victoria Park owns a portion of it. The reserve at Victoria owns a portion of it. The county owns a portion, I think they own a portion around the fire station, and then the city of DeLand owns a portion. And I don't know how you actually divide up a wetland in terms of stormwater management. And, we saw problems on Taylor Road as a result after the big storms. But the thing is, it's a massive wetland that has been preserved, and it took coordination with multiple landowners and jurisdictions to make it happen. To what extent could we write language that actually encourages and incentivizes coordination among adjacent developments to maximize the size of the preserved areas? Because we know, I'm going to use Florida panther as just an example. Some of these top predators really do require large acreage, and the Florida Wildlife Corridor is wonderful for protecting that, but we have opportunities to create protected areas in our urban zones by doing these kinds of, and I'm going to say, clustering of preservation areas, not just clustering of houses.
Sure.
That's where I wanted to go.
Sure. Keith or Ginger, you want to respond to that? There's a little grin on Keith's face.
As it stands, the staff does not have the ability, and the code doesn't provide that we can proscribe where someone's tree preservation area will be, or where their, set-asides will be. As a matter of practice, most often they're on the edges, and so that makes sense because the neighbor's, preservation area is also going to be on the edge. When we know that there are developments that are coming, sort of at the same time, it's not a very common occurrence, then we can make suggestions, and we do make suggestions anyway, even if there's not an adjacent development. Part of the conservation sub theory is that very thing, is that you cluster those lots, and so much of it is then preserved in open space, that open space is going to naturally be connected to someone else's open space, and so on and so on. But in terms of, if a developer comes in and they have a plan and they want all of their lots here, and we're not going to be able to say, no, you're not going to have them there, you're going to have them here. A lot of that just sort of naturally comes out. The construction is going to be in the areas outside of the wetlands, and so that happens just sort of organically, but we really don't have the ability to prescribe that at the moment.
Okay. Interesting thought, though. Jessica?
Yeah, first to Wendy's thought, we don't currently, but I think it'd be pretty easy. So I'm with you. Because I think it's similar to what you see on the planning side and the zoning side where, and I don't know that the county code does this, so I'm not giving them ideas, but in Port Orange, there's a requirement for development to ensure shared access between properties. And so I would say it's very similar to that. Like there are elements that require coordination with your neighbors, and that's okay. So I think that it's something that could be drafted. I was going to say, my question is, I think this is set up and it addresses one of my initial concerns, but raises a new one. So I'm sorry. Where subdivisions, it says they should be their own tracks. And so you calculate the 15% kind of on its own. In Norma and Eco, and we can deal with this separately, that's fine. It's my opinion that it's not always the best approach to have a homeowners association. And so former president, agreed. No. And so I don't know if in those areas where if we're having 1 acre lot subdivisions and you have 10 lots, do you need an HOA who then controls the tree preservation area, or can you do it on individual lots in that case? I don't have a clear preference, but I just want to make sure we touch on it.
We have a clear preference, and we have both in this county, right? We have subdivisions where tree preservation is on lots, and so every lot has a tree preservation easement on it, and there are all the things you can and can't do in your tree preservation easement. So we have 100 different property owners that are in charge of doing the right thing. And then we have subdivisions where the tree preservation or the natural vegetation areas are in tracts that are identified on the plot, on the plat, and they're managed by the homeowners association. It is an enforcement nightmare to have tree preservation easements on individual lots, because as soon as you move in, and I'm no different than anybody else, I want to put my kid's playground right there. I want to put a sandbox right there. I want to be able to see through here, so I'm cutting down these trees. And our ability to is nearly zero. So from a from an enforcement perspective, it is much better for us to have them in tracks, that then there's an entity that is responsible for that, and who that then we can then go to if something, you know, goes sideways.
Okay. Oh, Jessica, go ahead.
Can I have a follow-up question on the same thread? Lately, and this is just a practical thing, we've run into a lot of older subdivisions where the associations are defunct, where they just didn't keep it up. And so if that's the case, how do you enforce anyways? Do they have to reinstitute or get sued? But is there the thought, and where we see those is where there's like 5 lots and they had an association and it's gone. So I absolutely get on the major scale, having an association, they're going to keep that association up. But is there in subdivisions with 10 or fewer lots, maybe something like that?
Well, what I can say is that if the tree preservation is on someone's lot and they got that survey, to them, it's their property. And they're going to do with it what they want to on their property. If it's outside of their property boundary, they typically stop. Even if it's defunct, they're like, this is my property boundary. Here are my property stakes. It's usually where it ends. Even if there's no entity in charge of it, they typically leave it alone.
But you're right.
Yeah.
Situation.
No.
Now there is no association anymore.
On lots where they don't have to plat, let's say on a subdivision where they're doing a 2-lot split or for whatever, we do still enforce this, but we enforce it with a conservation easement and signage. So that's how we do that on things that don't plat, but ideally we want it in a tract.
Okay, I've written a couple things that we're going to need to vote on to move us along. But Tyler, if you have a final comment for us.
If these are ecologically valuable lands that we're wanting to see increased protection on, that we allow the development types that if they have an HOA, it's probably detrimental to our interests. What's the solution to it? I don't have a good solution, so I threw it out on the table, but, okay, so my question, I wanted to get back to agenda a little bit here. And in bullet A, the underlined addition is existing protected trees within tree preservation areas. Historically, if memory serves me correct, we were allowed to have half of the tree preservation area as a replanted area, and half of it had to be occupied by existing trees. Was I understanding that correctly, Juan?
Yeah, if you look down further, it says a minimum of 50% of the required trees.
Okay,
So-
that's not being proposed to be changed then. Okay. I like the proposed cleanup on this. I would suggest that if the group's comfortable maintaining the 15% requirement, that most of what's been discussed, I think we should, or the committee should hit, if I'm not a part of it at that point. Our wildlife corridors are important. They don't have to be straight lines. They don't have to be pre-planned or prescribed across properties, but we could have requirements that you identify some line of connection with an adjacent property. And I think that that's something good to explore when those sections of code come before the committee. I think that, and this is an area that I will probably get some disagreement on, but I think landscape buffers actually present an opportunity to provide some of that around the development. And if we size them correctly, we make sections of them NVRAs and we make them not accessible and not a part of those amenity sets, that can bring value to some of our corridors for wildlife being preserved regardless. And one of the last things that I kind of want to touch on here is we keep talking about these areas. Well, I find trees to be valuable. The 2 most valuable things to me and Norma are our water resources and our wildlife resources. neither of those are the tree codes. So I would like to suggest we kind of take what's shown here and move forward.
The A through E.
Yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Not to take it to a vote, but just to, if nobody has any other comments that we can probably get on.
Okay. Bill?
So, first of all, I would say that the little tree preservation, the tree buffer, the landscape buffers, probably really don't provide a lot of wildlife corridor. They're just, they get all clogged up, nobody ever maintains them. No, panthers or bears or things are running through those, maybe some raccoons and stuff, but, and then to talk about, so then A looks good to me if you're allowed to keep 50% non-preserved. I would not propose to increase it in Miramar. And then what's the third thing what's in B that we're going to talk about? Are we going to do all these at once?
Well, you know what I think would be helpful is if someone made a motion, and I would almost suggest Wendy, because she's the one who would like to change something where the area may not include any landscape buffer, correct? Why don't we vote on accepting this language A through E with the exception of not including any landscape buffer in that 15%? Why don't we take a vote on that and see where we stand? Correct. Correct. Do I have a second? All right. So we know where we stand. All right. So then does someone want to make a motion to accept A through E? As I didn't hear other, well, wait a minute, let's bring this up. This is where you're right. We're looking at trees, but it connects to other things. I like this idea if it is legally acceptable that you could coordinate with neighbors to identify corridors, where it makes sense. How can you encourage people to just have that quick dialogue for the benefit of the community and for the environment? Is that something that would be in an ordinance, or would it have to be a comprehensive plan policy piece that then dictates the ordinance?
So if you're asking me.
I am asking.
I think there's plenty of, I'm gonna call it fluff language in the comp plan that it would allow a policy in the land development code to already adopt that. I think it's all new language, so I don't think we're gonna create it today.
Okay.
But I think it's something that we could ask to look into.
Keep in mind, one of the tasks that we have on our list is identifying ways to protect wildlife habitat.
Mhm.
And we know that that's going to coincide with wetland protection and tree protection and whatever, but it's going to be something that we create from whole cloth, right? We don't have it yet.
Okay.
So it may be that is a way, a place to talk about both the connectivity and then, what we do about additional preservation. Maybe it's not additional tree preservation in Norma, but it's wildlife corridor, wildlife habitat preservation or something. So
Okay. Sounds good. Yeah. So we'll just remember to bring it back at that time. Okay. So does someone want to make a motion to approve A through E as written?
No, but I'll make a different motion.
That's right, because the motion said.
Nope.
Okay.
But we don't all agree. So
Well,
that's
that's not
not
what
what
the
the
motion.
motion
Okay, so who makes the motion?
So let's just take these one at a time. I make a motion to approve A as written, but not increase the percentage.
Tyler seconds. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, item B.
Let me try to
I'd
make a
like to-
motion.
okay.
Oh, you.
I'll make a motion to approve B, but remove the added language that it shall not be utilized to meet open space requirements. So what that means is that it,
Could be used. as
yes,
The double dip you're talking about.
if,
Other parts of the code.
I'd say it just doesn't bind us twice. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Do I have a second? Tyler, all those in Jessica, discussion.
I would like, I'm trying to get Wendy on board. Here's my thought. What we have done in other projects, because I agree that if it's a planted landscape buffer, it's nothing. There's no underbrush, there's no whatever. What if we said Said area may include any landscape buffer maintained in its existing state. So you're not,
Disrupting it.
right, right, correct. So that it's not a planted buffer, but if you use an existing preservation area as your strip, then you can count that. Because that goes to the wildlife corridor, it's not an interruption, all of those systems remain.
Can I ask two clarifying questions on how the group would feel? Frequently, I end up with a existing natural buffer that has a bunch of dead trees and other things that can have value, but there's not live trees around it. And I think it would be a good idea that we are allowed to supplementally plant the native existing buffers. The other question is regarding nuisance trees. When we get something that is full of camphors or Brazilian pepper or something else, we typically remove those, which again gets, we get restricted or our hands tied if we require it be maintained natural. Would those areas become ineligible?
So what if we borrow the language in conservation easements that say should be preserved in their natural state, which allows for removal of the invasives and the nuisance, and it would allow for removal of safety risks and things like that, like dead trees, so that the rest can flourish.
And can we enhance it with additional native plantings in kind? I mean, those would be the things I would
Right.
suggest that we don't tie our hands on, and we'll get better results.
Okay, so with that discussion point, are we amending the motion? If, Bill, you want to amend that to include, and Ginger, did you get what was? Yes. You got it. Yeah. So Bill amends that. Tyler,
I was going to say that's really what I was intending when I had mentioned it previously. I just don't think I
Awesome.
made my point.
okay, so then we withdrew. Amended. Oh, yeah, that amended. Amended and a second. And Wendy has a comment. Wendy?
Could we vote on C before we vote on B? Is that, can we table the amendment? I don't know what the right
Well-
language is here. Can we,
But
Can-
why so?
because I want to make sure that we get 30-foot buffers before I agree to
Oh, I see.
pull back.
I'm comfortable. You want B and C together?
Oh, sure.
Amend it again. Bill, do you amend again? Bill, are you comfortable with that?
No, because I won't approve that, but I would be fine with all the proposed revisions in B. So let's.
I think we gotta do it separate. Let's go to C. Well, what about that motion on the table that was amended? We got to vote on it. Table it. All right. All right, on to C. Can I have a motion on C, please?
I move to approve C as written.
Do I have a second? Bernie, thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Bill? All right, motion carries. Back to B. All right, picking back up B. Any other discussion on that? Otherwise, yes. A motion and then Tyler seconded. Yes, amended by Bill. And he seconded that, so we're all good. Okay. Wendy you want to say something? No, okay. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Man,
Wow, all right. Oh, sorry, Ginger. Okay, E. Is there anyone who'd like to make a motion to approve E? Yeah, I think it can be on consent because I guess we didn't touch on that particularly. Consent agenda unless there's any, Jessica?
I have a question. See,
Jessica's
that's the
got a
problem
question.
with the consent. We're supposed to act on, oh, it's fine. It reads removal of vegetation categorized as an invasive exotic in Florida's exotic, yada, yada, yada. Any existing improvements or debris is required.
So what that's trying to say.
Thank you.
Maybe it doesn't say it well, is in a tree preservation area, we're going to expect that you remove all the exotics, you remove any existing improvements. So if there's a shed or whatever, and you remove all trash and debris. If you're going to count it as tree preservation.
Okay, so can
That
we,
doesn't seem like that.
right,
That would be good if it
I think
did.
it could be stated more clearly.
Okay.
Because that's.
I can, yeah. So,
So in concept, that's what we meant. If it, maybe we need to write it better.
Well, yeah, I think you need to flip the order. If you start with removal of vegetation, removal of existing improvements, comma, debris and vegetation categorized as da, 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 da.
well,
Would
and
that be clear?
well, or let's not rearrange too much. I think the simplest is tree preservation areas shall require removal of vegetation categorized as yada yada. Any existing improvements, comma, or debris, strike the rest. I like an Oxford comma.
Okay,
Okay.
so you didn't change anything. You just are striking through that last sentence? Okay. Okay. All right. So who wants to make a motion for that sentence? Jessica. All right. Second by Wendy. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay. It is 3:48. Ginger thinks we should wrap it up. I'm not in
No, 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 no,
disagreement. I am
just-
not in
no.
disagreement. This has been very positive so far, so let's end on a great note. Let's have some open, I guess, some discussion if we will. Go ahead, Bill.
Gonna vote on your replacement.
Oh, I thought you decided Melissa will stand in until you get a new person, a couple of new people appointed, and then you can take a vote,
Okay.
right? That's what okay, Tyler?
To do research outside of here as well as here, because it's an area that's really, really misunderstood. When we develop and we increase runoff, but we don't change rainfall, and we don't change what's happening below a certain depth below the grade. What we can change is where water goes into the ground, how much water we get from the site. So we see a lot of sites where there's flooding after development. The engineering gets reviewed, there's not necessarily a flaw with the engineering. Every now and then I look at those sites, I see a flaw in the engineering, that you have a retention pond that's built with a berm, that the bottom of the pond is above the toe of the berm, and it's not a wide enough berm to keep the water from perking through it. That's engineering that maybe didn't consider all of the impacts of that pond, but it's not that we've increased the amount of water going into the ground or changed effectively the groundwater elevation because the pond is higher. If you look at like the reserve at Victoria site that I mentioned earlier, our firm designed all of our ponds are interior except one that spills into the giant wetland that Wendy was talking about earlier. We don't have anywhere that we have a pond with a big berm. I don't want to pick on other engineers, but there's a project that I drive by every Saturday when I go to have breakfast with my dad, and there's a 15-foot high berm for a 6-foot deep dry pond. And I don't understand how anybody thought it was a good idea. It's not a very wide berm or anything of that nature. So there are projects that the engineering is not as good as what we really deserve as a community. And there are projects where the engineering is good. And I don't want to say that every project I've ever engineered has been perfect, but I try to care about what I'm designing and think about where I'm putting water on the site, how it's affecting the project and otherwise. Wetlands are land that seasonally inundates. So part of the year they're dry, part of the year they're wet. There is, I'm going to say something that I don't mean offensively, because there is magic to wetlands, but there's not magic to what they are. They're ground that has an extended period of time that there isn't oxygen in the soil to support the bacterial growth, so it doesn't break down the sludge. That same thing exists in your septic tank. That is exactly the same mechanism, and the same sludge forms in your septic tank. And so I think what we need to really look at is remember that groundwater is groundwater. If we irrigate, we're adding water to the basin. If we irrigate from groundwater, which is one of my suggestions, is that we look at not using reclaim, not using aquifer depth wells, but using groundwater wells for irrigation within our communities, superficial groundwater wells, that would result in dewatering of the areas that we're irrigating, so that we're not changing our groundwater elevations. I believe that some of the flooding we've seen in DeLand is a result of things of pumping water around more than it is of necessarily negligence in engineering and stormwater designs. And I think that a lot of, when I look at the Blue Springs BMAP, 22% of the nitrogen coming out of Blue Springs is superficial turf grass fertilizer, so stormwater runoff based nutrients. Yet I believe it was like 54% was septic tank based nitrogen. And so when we start talking about Norma, when we talk about Indian River Lagoon, there's a lot of tools in my toolbox as an engineer to improve things, but a policy that says that I need to have an aerobic digestive septic system if we're going to allow septic, it's not that expensive of a shift just to go to adding the aerobic unit to the system. It adds a maintenance cost. Those are the types of things that I think we need to, as a committee, have coming forward. And I think that it's really important, if I'm not here, if I don't get replaced by another engineer, that you guys seek external input on some of these items and you get some impartiality. I find that a lot of times the best of intents with ignorant basis results in us getting a bunch of rules that get exploited, and we keep chasing our tail, and everybody feels like they put all this effort in unsuccessfully. And that's, I see everybody working very hard. I've been very proud to be a part of this. And with that, I'm going to try to lobby and get my conflict
There you go. Yeah.
waived.
You'll have opportunity to still comment, Tyler, for sure.
Well, and you know, it requires a 2/3 vote of council present. So if we have 7 members present, I would have to get 5 of them to vote to waive the conflict.
All right.
So with that, thanks everybody. And if I'm not here next time, I'd appreciate everybody's work and good luck.
I think that I have a question. Are we allowed to lobby for Tyler to remain, or because it's a potentially a conflict?
You can especially speak to the council member that appointed you or the person that replaced them on the council. I don't think there's a conflict in saying that you want one of your members to stay.
The reason I ask that is because I think Tyler brings a viewpoint and an expertise that will be sorely missed if he's out of here. You know, we need this kind of input in the conversations that we're able to have. So we have homework.
Bliss?
Quickly, I echo what you just suggested and, you know, lobby our councilman, but also I was going to say, you know, go ahead and get it on the record if possible, that should that not work, you know, and he no longer be with us, if we can go ahead and ask that he come back when we get to that section of code and make a presentation and just go ahead and.
Perfect. Jack?
Why aren't you staying? I'm a bit confused.
Sorry.
Because you say if, and then I thought it was official, and now we're talking about
Conflict is
lobbying
official,
people.
It can be waived. So what has happened is I'm a 25% owner in my engineering firm, and we have been tentatively selected as one of 7 companies that will have a continuing service contract for engineering services with Volusia County for the next 5 years.
Oh.
And so as a politically appointed individual, I'm not also allowed to own, it's either 5 or 10%, it was irrelevant, so I never memorize it, of the company and be here. Now, I have an employee that would make a great replacement for me, but I think that that's really not absolving the conflict in a meaningful way. So if they vote to not keep me on the committee, I think that, you know, I can't really solve it internal to my business.
Yeah, and so this would have to go in front of the county council to get a waiver, if you will.
Chris is still figuring out what my process is going to be, but I believe I'm going to write a resignation letter that will be considered or will be accepted should the conflict not be waived. I think that's what I have to do.
I see.
So-
Okay,
Okay.
thank you.
Is that all you had, Jack? I'm gonna go to Jessica.
Just a quick question on process for the chair, because I'm happy to have Melissa fill in for as long as she wants. There was two mentions. It was one, we're going to wait until we have the members who aren't here today present, and there's another that said we're going to wait until others are appointed. I don't know that we. need
You're
to
right, I
wait
did
for the
say
fill-in.
both, didn't I? Yeah, you're right. You all wanted to wait for Sarah Lee, Alex, and Bob to be present, not necessarily for the reappointments. Okay. Melissa?
I just don't want today to end without thanking you, Carrie, for the leadership of this committee. I won't be as good with Robert's rules as you. People are going to have to slap me down now and then and help me out. Yeah. But thank you so much. And maybe you'll be back too to talk to us someday. So thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are adjourned. Oh, no. Ginger.
We can adjourn. I just wanted to remind everybody that next time we're going to talk about low impact development, we probably won't have time to talk about trees. If, I don't know what the presentation is going to be yet. So, in the event that that presentation only is scheduled to take an hour or whatever, then we can pick up where we left off. I have asked that the grant contract group provide us information at least a week in advance so that you can have something to look at before the meeting. They'll certainly give a presentation, but they want your feedback, and I don't think it's fair to do a presentation and expect that you'll have immediate feedback. So that's the goal, is to get you information at least a week out, and hopefully that'll be really interesting and kind of tackle some of these more big picture ideas that we definitely want to start incorporating into the code.
Great.
So the contract is with the East Central Florida Regional Planning Council with a subcontract to the University of Florida, which is Eben Bean and his team.
Mhm.
Yep. I am not sure yet. I just nailed them down to the date yesterday afternoon. So I'm waiting on some more details about what they're going to present and who.
Okay, yes.
Well, I think what we figured out was, because originally it was, yeah, hey, we're going to give the presentation and then we want some feedback, and, and maybe everybody could provide their feedback. I said, I mean, they're working as a group. They need to have consensus. So I think there's enough time in the grant process that if we can provide some feedback as a group at our May meeting, that they have time to incorporate that in the final report. But, whatever they get, the earlier the better in terms of reaction from us, right? So I think that they'll do a presentation. We'll have, you'll all have an opportunity to provide whatever off the cuff feedback you have at the meeting in April. And then they'll want some official, maybe consensus type feedback from the May meeting.
All right. Yes.
Well,
Yes.
everybody that attended, but not everybody on this committee attended. So I will make sure that that information gets out to the whole group.
Okay. All right. Go ahead.
Can you tell us those three items, and one of them was a proposed code? Is that right?
Yeah. So I wasn't at the meeting that you guys were all at. So they're looking at the code to see what suggested code language to include in Volusia County Land Development Code to promote, incentivize, require low impact development, low green stormwater infrastructure. And they're creating a like a manual, a LID green stormwater infrastructure manual. I don't know about number 3 off the top
Well,
of my
a
head.
great question. When they're here, we'll get that clarified. Okay, adjourned. 4:01. All right.
And